of showers across the country, another one moving northwards overnight. Again, heavy downpours are possible, so again expect a fair amount of spray and surface water on the roads tomorrow morning. Again, a pretty warm night as well, 15, 16 maybe in some towns and cities. Really quite warm and humid air sitting across the country, which will again allow more heavy showers to come tomorrow. Again, many places will start dry and fine with sunny spells away from those bands of showers, and then the showers just develop pretty widely by late morning. Maybe not too many across southernmost parts of England, some sunshine here, and temperatures in the sunny spells, high teens or low 20s, so perhaps a little cooler than today. Again, heavy showers could cause some issues, certainly through Wednesday evening's rush hour. Again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Thunderstorms are likely in a few spots. Perhaps a hint of a change with the low pressure moving in, the winds easing a touch, but that means slow moving heavy showers on Thursday and Friday. And it does look a little drier for most of us by Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and welcome to GB Newsday with me, Gloria De Piero.
And me, Mark Longhurst. And today, of course, finally the day when in the next few minutes we will have a new Prime Minister.
Boris Johnson gave his final speech on the steps of Downing Street this morning and has been in Balmoral, where he's tendered his resignation to the Queen.
Well, Liz Truss is meeting the Queen there now for her official audience, when she will, of course, be invited to be our new Prime Minister. We'll be bringing you coverage of the very latest developments as they happen here on GB News. But first, let's get the latest headlines with Rosie.
Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 12. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. As we've been hearing, breaking news in the last few minutes. Boris Johnson has now officially resigned as Prime Minister after meeting with the Queen. Earlier outside Number 10, he promised his fervent support to his successor and reflected on his government's achievements, highlighting Brexit, the COVID vaccine rollout and support for Ukraine. Mr Johnson also said the incoming Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. This is, I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to My fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
Liz Truss is now due to arrive at Balmoral, where she will officially become the country's new Prime Minister. Her plane landed in Aberdeen a short while ago. She's now en route to the castle, where she'll have an audience with the Queen. Now, later this afternoon, she's expected to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. She'll also name her new cabinet. In some other news now, a man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth Police says a suspect vehicle was being chased and officers deliberately crashed into the car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. A police firearm was discharged and a man thought to be in his 20s was injured. The Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. The father of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was shot in Liverpool, says her death cannot be in vain. The 9-year-old was killed by a gunman who chased his intended target into her home. John Francis Pratt is appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Detectives have been granted a 36-hour extension to question 3 men over her death. Canadian police say one of the suspects in the mass stabbings in Saskatchewan has been found dead. Damien Sanderson's body was discovered during a police manhunt. Officers say his injuries weren't self-inflicted and they haven't ruled out his brother's involvement. Well, his brother, Miles Sanderson, is still on the run. The pair are both suspected of killing 10 people. At least 19 other people were injured in the attacks. Commanding officer Rhonda Blackmore warned the one on the loose still is armed and is dangerous.
Miles Sanderson, Damien's brother, may have sustained injuries. This has not been confirmed. But we do want the public to know this because there is a possibility he may seek medical attention. Even if he is injured, it does not mean he is not still dangerous. Miles has a lengthy criminal record involving both persons and property crimes.
Tens of thousands of firefighters and control room staff will be balloted for industrial action. The Fire Brigades Union says it follows a 2% pay offer that was made in June, which hasn't been increased despite soaring inflation. The FBU claims it represents a real terms pay cut. More than 32,000 of its members across the UK will vote next month. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's head back to Mark and Gloria.
It's 12:05. Hello and welcome to GB Newsday.
Yes, and today Boris Johnson, of course, saying farewell to his premiership and to the country as he headed to Balmoral to formally offer his resignation to the Queen, and that's in the last few minutes that's happened.
We're expecting Liz Truss to give her first address as Prime Minister around 4 o'clock today, with cabinet announcements following soon after.
Well, right now, business continuing, just to remind you, in the House of Commons, with Foreign Office questions taking place at the moment. But there's one difference, of course.
Yes, of course. There is no Foreign Secretary there because she is at Balmoral to meet the Queen to ask her to form a government.
Yes, let's just reflect. 12:10, we were told Liz Truss with her audience with the Queen expected to last about 20 minutes, at which time she will be asked to form the administration. And we hope, of course, the answer will be yes, and she will then technically be Prime Minister. Let's cross now to...
Just the two of them.
Just the two of them.
No officials,
no aides, no one else.
staffers.
And it's not the kissing of the hands, just to reiterate that. It's still described as such, but we expect it will be a curtsy from Liz Truss.
From a female.
From a female, yep. And then that will be that. Let's cross to Balmoral, though, because our royal reporter Cameron Walker has been following events there, which have been pretty busy this morning.
They have indeed been pretty busy, and it will be a curtsy followed by a handshake, I would expect, rather than the kissing of the hands, as you say. But in the last minute or so, I've just received a statement from Buckingham Palace, and it reads, "The Right Honourable Boris Johnson MP has had an audience with the Queen this morning and tendered his resignation as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, which Her Majesty was graciously pleased to accept." We then saw Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie leave through the front gates of Balmoral Castle here around 10-15 minutes ago, and he has left Balmoral Castle, and any minute now we're expecting the new Conservative leader to arrive here at Balmoral Castle, where Liz Truss, where the Queen will ask her formally to form a government. Now, it's one of the Queen's remaining personal prerogatives to ask someone to be Prime Minister. She doesn't need to consult or ask for advice on this matter. The requirement basically is to find someone who can command the confidence of the House. Usually it's the leader of the political party with an overall majority in the House of Commons, and in this case Liz Truss ticks all the boxes. So she is on her way now. We're expecting she'll arrive around kind of 10 minutes past 12. That's the kind of timing we were given yesterday. It might be a bit delayed because her plane was delayed in landing due to the poor weather conditions at Aberdeen Airport. But as I said, the Queen will invite her to form a government. And this is the first time the Queen has appointed a new Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle. Usually it happens at Buckingham Palace, but we found out last week that Her Majesty was going to stay at Balmoral in order to provide certainty for the Prime Minister's diary. We understand that she has been experiencing some mobility problems in recent... There is a car just coming. It is not the Prime Minister, so don't worry, we are still waiting for Liz Truss to arrive. But we know that the Queen, as I was saying, has been experiencing mobility issues in recent months, and it was thought that perhaps if Her Majesty had planned to make the 1,000-mile round trip to London to appoint a new Prime Minister, and she woke up this morning and was struggling with movement, then last-minute logistical challenges would have to take place for the new Prime Minister to travel up to Balmoral to accept the Queen's invitation to form a government. So that is perhaps why it's all happening at Balmoral. There's no constitutional reason as to why it cannot happen at Balmoral Castle, but inevitably this does raise questions about the health and the mobility challenges that our 96-year-old Queen is experiencing at the moment.
Cameron, in a very rainy Deeside for the moment. Thank you. Let's hope that Liz Truss and her team have brought enough umbrellas for that. But clearly, of course, the process itself will take place, as you say, inside the castle there at Balmoral. Just to remind you, 1885, we're being told, was the last occasion that a Prime Minister was asked to form a government at Balmoral, when Lord Salisbury became Prime Minister. There we are, a little bit of history for you.
Let's chat with our political reporter now. Catherine Forster. Catherine, what a day. One person has left, so not a happy day for him, and Liz Truss about to arrive. A massive day for her. When will we hear her first words?
Well, we're expecting a speech from her 4 o'clock or thereabouts. Hopefully it will be from the podium in front of Downing Street, as it usually is. The only caveat would be the weather. There's been a lot of rain, there's been thunder and lightning. Just checking on the weather app before, 50% chance of rain at 4 o'clock and thunder and lightning. So it's possible they might have to do it indoors. That would be disappointing, I think, but let's see. Not expecting a very long speech, probably fairly brief. Obviously, she's got a massive job to get on with, and she will want to be... She's got Prime Minister's questions, she's got the Cabinet reshuffle, she's got a lot to get in place before tomorrow.
Yeah.
But we expect her to outline that she understands the cost of living crisis is the number one priority, and that she is going to act quickly to reassure people.
And on that basis, we expect Kwasi Kwarteng will be the new Chancellor, and we're being told that the structure to address the energy crisis will have to be probably in place by Thursday, even though it may be actually Jacob Rees-Mogg who becomes Business Secretary and talks directly to the oil and electricity companies. But that's got to be top of the in tray, hasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And she's gone on a bit of a journey, hasn't she, Liz Truss? Because at the beginning of the campaign, she spent several weeks saying no handouts and just talking about tax cuts, no regulation. But it has become increasingly clear as the forecast of energy price caps rocket up to, we're hearing, you know, horrific figures of up to 6,000 and 7,000 by next January, February, that people cannot pay these bills. So clearly, because it has been expected for some time that she will be Prime Minister, they have had time, and the announcement is expected probably Thursday, maybe slightly later, but a big package of up to £100 billion of support and a freeze of energy bills, which of course is a Labour policy. So
and cabinet reshuffles. Now, they're an opportunity to appoint who you want to be surrounded with, but they're also a moment of danger because there's going to be not just happy people, there are going to be far more disappointed people who don't get jobs today.
Yes, and it looks like it's going to be a very big clear out. Not many people going to be left in place, not even, because of course she's resigned and we know this for a fact, but Nadine Dorries had been offered Culture Secretary. She's decided not to take that. But yes, we know Liz Truss looks like bringing in her big supporters. So Ella Braverman, who of course went for the leadership too, and then rode in behind her, likely to be Home Secretary. James Cleverly, almost certainly Foreign Secretary. Kwasi Kwarteng, as we know, Chancellor.
And sorry to rain on her parade, but how dangerous could that be for her if she doesn't have an inclusive cabinet, bringing in all the former Rishi Sunak and the One Nation Tories to try and make a broad church? Because a lot of people are suggesting that there are quite a few MPs are not happy that she is their new leader.
Lots of very unhappy MPs. There were something like 200 MPs that hadn't come out publicly in support of her. We know that she was not their first choice for leader, and her victory was by no means as conclusive as she might have hoped, 57% as against 43% for Rishi Sunak. So I think it is dangerous. She said she's going to form a government of all the talents. Well, we shall see. But to give you an example, Therese Coffey, one of her big supporters, almost certainly going to be Health Secretary. They are saying today, various sources, she will be appointed Deputy Prime Minister. Now, there was some thought that that role might have been given to Penny Mordaunt, who, of course, very narrowly missed being in the last two. That would have been an inclusive gesture, but we will see. Also, very noticeably, she didn't, when she was announced leader yesterday, she didn't say anything to Rishi Sunak. There was no shake of hands. There was no acknowledgement. So
it has been bruising, this contest. Catherine, you're going to stay with us, aren't you, for more of your excellent analysis? Well, Boris Johnson gave his last speech as Prime Minister a few hours ago.
Yes, at the dais before it started raining, of course. Well, Tom Harwood, our GB News political correspondent, was there and delighted to say that he is still with us. And there's been much talk, Tom, about Cincinnatus, the Roman patrician politician that Boris Johnson mentioned in that speech, because a lot of classical scholars have pointed out he returned to power after going back to his ploughing the field.
Yes, no doubt Google trend searches will show a huge number of people Googling who on earth Cincinnatus was and what exactly he was doing in control of the Roman Republic in around 450 BC. I know that I had to brush up skimming the Wikipedia page. My GCSE classics didn't quite take me to exactly what was said and done. But yes, Cincinnatus was the general who came to rule the Roman Republic and then relinquished his dictatorship, returning to plough his field, has been pointed to by political scientists and commentators for years as almost the archetypal ruler, the gracious ruler, popular with his people but knowing when his time was up, because so often we see with rulers they go on and on far too long. And often he's brought up in the context of George Washington, the first US president who surprised many by giving up his power 8 years in to being president of that new country, setting a precedent for future presidents. But what is remarked upon today is that Cincinnatus was then, according to some scholars, this isn't the universal view, but according to some scholars, returned to power, was asked by the Roman people to return to his role as, I suppose, dictator of that early republic, which, according to some scholars, he did. Now, being the classicist that he is, holding that degree in classics from Oxford University that he does, there is no doubt that Boris Johnson will have known that literature, will have known that analysis. Might Boris Johnson be wanting us to talk about Cincinnatus and his gracious return, not just from going to ploughing the field, but coming back to power afterwards? Might he be wanting us to think about what he's doing later in his political life? I suspect this isn't the end of Boris Johnson. This is not the last we have heard from him in whatever capacity he moves into, whether he remains an MP, whether he returns to some form of executive office, whether he holds some sort of international role, or most certainly, I would expect, taking on some sort of writing role, perhaps in the pages of the Daily Telegraph. I suspect we'll be hearing quite a bit from Boris Johnson as the months and years go on.
Throughout the contest, Liz Truss says she wanted to create a government of all the talents. Looking at the speculation, though obviously heavily brief speculation, which makes it more than speculation, it doesn't suggest it's going to be very inclusive of those who are not her allies at the top echelons of that cabinet.
Yes, you've got a choice when you become Prime Minister. Do you try and create a more unified party, bring in detractors inside the tent, have them around the decision-making table, maybe making decision-making harder, but giving the impression of a more unified big tent government? Or do you do the opposite? Do you have allies around your cabinet table going in the same ideological direction, making decisions perhaps more quickly and in a more unified way, but risking dissent on your backbenches? It does look like the latter path is likely the one that Liz Truss is choosing in this instance, but it will be very interesting to see what, for example, Rishi Sunak is offered. Liz Truss has implied that she will offer Rishi Sunak a role in her cabinet, but Rishi Sunak has implied that he would turn one down. So it will be very, very interesting to see the dynamics of that, how it all fits together. And we don't have very long to wait to see those famous faces of the Tory party, those big beasts, those expected top cabinet members walking down this very street after Liz Truss returns from Balmoral, makes her first address to the nation as Prime Minister from this street.
There, because we believe this is the motorcade arriving at Balmoral with Liz Truss and her team, having made that journey from Aberdeen Airport, where the Dassault private jet landed a little earlier. Our correspondent Cameron is there. Cameron, that was a pretty swift entrance by her.
It was a very swift entrance indeed, Mark. Yes, Liz Truss, I'm not quite sure he was in the car with her, if her husband was accompanying her, but Liz Truss, the new Conservative leader, has now arrived in the grounds of Balmoral Castle and will be invited formally by the Queen to form a government in her name and therefore become the Queen's 15th Prime Minister of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It's one of the few remaining personal prerogatives of the Queen to appoint her new Prime Minister, which means she doesn't really need to consult or act on advice of anybody. The requirements is commanding the confidence of the House of Commons, which usually means the leader of the political party with the most seats in the House of Commons. So Liz Truss ticks all of those boxes, and it is usually then what is known as the kissing of the hands during this meeting in the drawing room that's going to be taking place in Balmoral. It won't be a physical kissing of the hands, it's more likely to be a curtsy and a handshake. The kissing of the hands perhaps will happen at a Privy Council meeting at a later date, but this is the first time that Her Majesty the Queen has appointed a new Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle. It usually happens at Buckingham Palace, but the decision was taken last week that it would happen at Balmoral Castle to provide certainty for the Prime Minister's diary. We know Her Majesty's been experiencing mobility problems in recent months and over the last year or so, and this means that if she had decided to make the 1,000-mile round trip from Balmoral to London, and then woke up this morning and felt that she could not make the journey. Then last-minute travel arrangements would need to be made for Boris Johnson, the outgoing Prime Minister, and Liz Truss, the incoming Prime Minister. So that's why we believe the decision was taken last week. And there's no kind of constitutional reason as to why the Queen cannot appoint a new Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle. Her great-grandfather, Edward VII, actually appointed one of his Prime Ministers in France because he didn't want to interrupt his holiday. But this inevitably raises questions about Her Majesty the Queen's health and ability to move and travel, as of course she is 96 years old.
Thank you very much indeed for bringing us that breaking news there as the Liz Truss motorcade has arrived at Balmoral. And I think technically now, as we speak, we haven't actually got a Prime Minister as such, because she's not actually gone to the Queen and been asked to form the new administration. So we're in a sort of constitutional limbo.
I don't think for very long, and I think it's a dead cert. Because we are going to go back to number 10, where Tom Howard is, because one other thing that is certain is that an energy price freeze of some sort is on the cards. That's the number one thing in her in-train. It's the number one thing that she's going to address. When? Who's going to benefit? How will it be paid for? Lots of questions, Tom. Give us some answers.
Yes, there is, of course, a lot of choreography going on in terms of putting together the political team behind the Liz Truss number 10. First, of course, all of those advisors, and we did see some political advisors be appointed earlier today. They've been having transition preparations in Dover House, just down the road. That's before they enter number 10 with Liz Truss, once she is Prime Minister. Then, of course, there do need to be cabinet ministers in place. And of course, we're expecting a cabinet meeting tomorrow morning. So those cabinet roles being appointed definitely this afternoon and tonight, meeting in Downing Street tomorrow morning. And potentially that is when cabinet will discuss plans, maybe even sign off plans. And we're hearing that there could be an announcement on dealing with energy bills as soon as Thursday, which would be remarkable speed for this new Prime Minister. And of course, there have been so many different leaks and briefings over what this intervention could be. Some suggesting it would cost over £100 billion, a monumental, gargantuan amount of money. The question is, how would it be paid for? Suggestion by some that there'd be some sort of smoothing effect, i.e. when energy prices tumble back down, a slightly higher level of energy bills than otherwise would have been the case to pay for it, paying it out over the longer period of time. Other people suggesting perhaps it could come out of general taxation or, frankly, borrowing. There's a question as to whether this will be a bill-specific redistribution or a freeze based on the tax and spend system. Now, neither of those sound particularly Trussian, to be frank. Liz Truss is someone who stood to be leader of the Conservative Party, boasting her free market, low tax credentials. It would be curious to see such a large interventionist policy be taken up by Liz Truss as her first act as Prime Minister. Perhaps some of those who most fervently backed her from the free market wing of the party would raise eyebrows at it, but frankly, maybe there's a political decision that has been taken here, that the crisis is such in many ways the country is in a state of economic warfare with Russia, and thereby we are having to deal with this situation in a warlike manner. That could be an argument that the former Foreign Secretary, known as a bit of a Russia hawk, may well make, but that is all to come because, as you rightly say, Liz Truss is not yet Prime Minister. She'll be going in to meet the Queen in the next couple of minutes' time, but for now, and frankly for the past hour, the country hasn't had a Prime Minister. If anything, the Sovereign has assumed control. It must be quite nice for Elizabeth II to feel like she's truly in control of the country. I wonder what she might be tempted to do for those few minutes where she has total control. But of course, no, we do have a First Secretary of State. Dominic Raab is still Deputy Prime Minister. If there were any urgent decisions that needed to be taken, he still has that role.
We'll talk to you throughout the day. It's going to be a busy one. Lots more news to bring you. Tom Howard, thank you.
Yes, Tom, thank you for that. Let's just reflect, actually, quite interesting that technically, yes, the sovereign is in charge from Scotland. So the UK being ruled from Scotland as we speak at the moment. Maybe just for about 15 minutes or so. But
Nicola Sturgeon is going to be setting out her priorities today,
exactly,
actually.
yeah. But just to reiterate the timings, we are thinking that Liz Truss will probably depart at about 20 to 1 now. She will be having her audience with the Queen at the moment to be offered the role of Prime Minister. And, of course, Boris Johnson has formally offered his resignation to the Queen at Balmoral a little earlier, so no longer as Prime Minister. But let's just reflect, he's still MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
Do you think he'll be able to do constituency surgeries every Friday? Because I mean, it's a serious point. That is the job of, well, it's the job of every MP, and that's the interesting thing about the job. It doesn't matter technically whether you're in the cabinet or not. You should still make yourself available for your constituents.
But what happens to all those lecture tours of the United States, the book writing that he's supposed to be doing, the magazines and newspapers? Will he have time to be a backbench MP? I mean, how much time does it take up?
Well, you really ought to be doing a couple of constituency surgeries every month. That's when any constituent can come and see you. You're often the last resort.
People with real big problems.
Yeah, and it's the power that the letter that you write, it's often to a government agency.
Just to give a nudge to get things
Give a nudge,
happening.
and it happens.
Yeah.
But he still has that role.
I guess you've got to be seen about in the constituency and meet and greet people as well.
Well, Uxbridge is interesting. It's always been a Tory seat.
Right.
But actually, because of the demographic changes, which Alice may be about to talk to us about because she is there today, isn't she? But the demographic changes suggest that Labour could be in with a shot.
7,000 majority, yeah. Well, what do those constituents actually think of Boris's departure? Could Labour indeed make a bid for that seat? Let's speak to Alice, who's in Uxbridge. What have been people telling you there?
Hi there. Well, I have to say it is a very mixed picture here, and many people really tapping into some of the issues that you were just saying there. I've had a lot of people, I've been here so many times the last few months, getting their reactions to sort of the various comings and goings in Westminster, and a lot of people have been very critical of Boris Johnson as a constituency MP. We've had issues here with the police station closing down. A lot of people were really frustrated about that. Last month, 3 state-run nurseries have closed, and a lot of people say they've written to Boris Johnson really, really frustrated because, of course, when you're Prime Minister and you're dealing with all the wranglings of Westminster, it's hard, I guess, to sort of juggle it with your constituency as well. So a lot of people I've spoken to have been very frustrated at him as a constituency MP. But I still think I could say in just as much measure there are many people who are still enormously loyal to Boris Johnson. This has been a very safe Tory seat ever since it was first created in 2010. And lots of people I've been speaking to say it's a real shame that he's resigned, and are still very pleased that he's continuing on to be the MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. I've been out and about speaking to people this morning, getting their reactions to his resignation, and this is what they had to say.
Yeah, I think he's going to be missed in some ways, and I hope he's going to stay in Parliament. I mean, he's no idiot, is he?
I don't kind of agree with it because I thought he was doing a very good job for the last couple of years, particularly during the COVID pandemic, where the government acted very quickly to put policies and programs in place to help people, whether it's vaccine rollout.
It's sad. I don't know why I had to resign. It's not fair. He was doing so well, helping us out of Brexit and dealing with COVID. All this came just as he took office, and now poor Liz Truss has got to deal with the energy crisis.
I think it had to happen. He lost the confidence of the public. And he lost the confidence of his team as well, like the cabinet as well. So if you haven't got support, there was a vote of confidence, but it was probably one of the lowest figures in history, and history suggests that he had to go.
So there you go, there's some of Boris Johnson's constituents. But I think, of course, it raises the questions that you were just both saying earlier there. Is like, what exactly is going to happen to this seat? And what exactly is Boris Johnson? Is he going to suddenly become a backbencher involved with all the sort of local politics, which is obviously a world away from dealing with the situation in Ukraine and dealing with Putin? So is he going to become more of a constituency MP, bearing in mind he's not from Uxbridge? And I think that's important to stress. A lot of people feel he was sort of parachuted in here here, he's not local to the area. So is he going to be a backbencher? And crucially, as you were saying there, Gloria, are Labour going to make a bid in the next election to try and take the seat for the first time? Because he only got a majority in the last election by just over 7,000 votes, which is not very much at all. So it'll be really interesting if Labour might use this opportunity, particularly bearing in mind we're also still waiting to hear whether Boris Johnson will be suspended in regards to if he has to, of course, prove to Parliament that he didn't mislead Parliament with parties going on at Downing Street. So all of that, I think, could feed into a situation, particularly with the cost of living crisis, that Labour could attempt to make, as you were saying there, Gloria, with the change in demographic of the area, they could try and make a bid to take the seat for the first time.
Alice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. And I understand about that 7,000 majority. It sounds a lot. I've lost 10,000 in one go and 7,000 in one go.
That's a lot to lose down the back of the sofa, isn't it? Yeah. Right, OK, well, we'll keep our eyes on Uxbridge for you, as we will, of course, on Balmoral, because just to remind you, Liz Truss is there as we speak with an audience with the Queen and is expected to be announced as the new Prime Minister shortly, and, of course, then having to form a new cabinet.
The current Business Secretary, Kwasi Kwarteng, is being widely tipped to be appointed as the next Chancellor. But how will he and the new Prime Minister deal with the energy crisis? We'll speak to GB News Business and Economics Editor Liam Halligan on what his leadership as a Treasurer will mean for all of us.
First, let's get an update on all this busy news. Here's Rosie.
Thanks both. It's 12:33. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date. Well, Boris Johnson has officially resigned as Prime Minister after meeting with the Queen. Buckingham Palace confirmed the move, saying Her Majesty was graciously pleased to accept his resignation. Mr Johnson and his wife Carrie spent almost 40 minutes with the monarch before leaving Balmoral. Earlier, outside Number 10, he promised his fervent support to his successor, saying Liz Truss and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it, and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
Liz Truss has now arrived at Balmoral, where she is having an audience with the Queen. She will then officially become the country's new Prime Minister. This afternoon, she's expected to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. She's also due to name her cabinet. Other news now. A man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth police say a suspect vehicle was chased and officers deliberately crashed into the car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. The Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. The father of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was shot in Liverpool, says her death cannot be in vain. John Francis Pratt is appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Detectives have been granted a 36-hour extension to question 3 men over her death. We're on your TV, we're online and on your radio. It's GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark and Gloria will be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you.
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Well, welcome back to GB Newsday. Another busy day. Just to bring you the latest, we understand that Liz Truss and her husband Hugh O'Leary have been officially welcomed at Balmoral, and that's taken place in the last few minutes. We saw the motorcade going into the castle. We're expecting now at about 5 minutes or so that there will be the official confirmation that she has accepted the offer from the Queen to make a new administration and becoming the new Prime Minister.
And what's always interesting, you mentioned that she had arrived with her husband. When it is a male spouse, we hear so far less about them. If you think about the scrutiny that Carrie was subject to, that Cherie Booth was subject to, Sarah Brown actually got a little bit of an easier ride. But actually, when it's a male spouse, and this is, of course, our third female Prime Minister, they tend to be far more of a support, a rock.
Yeah, but
I
think he's deliberately kept a sort of low profile, isn't he? He's a sort of an accountant who doesn't like the limelight anyway.
But that's the argument. I mean, the argument is, did Cherie and Carrie, did they really seek to steal the limelight? And that's the debate.
Anyway, Liam is with us as well, because it might be quite useful to have an accountant as a husband, given what she's got on her in tray with everything to deal with, including how to work out, 100 billion, we're being told, could be the bill for this energy crisis sort of announcement on Thursday, we're thinking.
Before she does anything, she has to tackle the pressing issue of the day, which is that huge rise in the off-gem energy price cap. I just wanted to take viewers through a couple of graphics, if I may, because I don't know about you, but it's quite hard to keep up with
big figures, aren't they?
Exactly where we are. So if we can take a look at the off-gem energy price cap on the graphic now. From October 2021, seems like an age ago, that was £1,277. These are the average household utility bills for the typical household. Then in the spring, April 2022, it went up to 1,970. That's where it currently is. But we know that from October, it's already been announced, another 80% rise to £3,549. So that's almost tripling in a year. And as we've stressed many, many times here on GB News, these price caps are for households, not for firms. There is no price cap at all for firms. So wholesale energy prices have gone up even more than that. They've gone up 5-10-fold, and this only applies to households, not firms.
£5 a firm.
So what may she do? We know already that Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, have announced £400 roughly for every household. That's an existing thing right across the board, In addition to that, there's an extra £650 or so for more vulnerable households, particularly those who are on certain qualifying benefits. What we now know, and it's probably going to be on Thursday, Mark, you're right, that's the plan. We now know that the Truss administration is going to implement a price freeze, and that price freeze is probably going to go back to the earlier price cap of 1,970 rather than the one that was £3,500. And we also know, we heard from the current Chief Secretary to the Treasury this morning, Simon Clarke, and other ministers have been hitting, there will be help for both households and for businesses. And for many GB News viewers, they work for small businesses, they may run small businesses. That is absolutely vital.
Who's going to pay for all this?
It's going to cost an enormous amount of money because, as you were saying, Mark, wholesale energy prices are currently around £5 per therm. That's up from £3 per therm when even that price cap of $3,500 a year was conceived. I think the way that the government's going to do this, rather than loading loads more money up on general taxation, what it's going to do, it's going to allow the energy companies, the providers, not the Shells and not the companies that get the stuff out the ground, the companies that sell it to us, they're going to allow them to take on big loans in order to pay the gap between the big wholesale prices and the lower prices they're going to charge consumers. This is going to last for 2 years, and those loans will be backed by government. I've done some back-of-the-envelope calculations, so's the Labour Party, in fairness to them. We're looking probably at around £70 billion for households for 2 years. That's the cost of furlough.
Yeah.
On top of that, for firms, unless, it may be more if wholesale prices spiral completely out of control, we're looking at another $30 billion. So that's about £100 billion. To put that in context, $100 billion is what we're already scheduled to borrow this year. So this would double government borrowing.
And just to put that in context, they're raising, what, $5 billion from the windfall tax?
Yes.
So no windfall tax is going to pay for this.
So
how are they going to structure this? I mean, is this going to be like a wartime debt that we'd be still paying in 10 years' time?
Well, who pays it is the really politically contentious bit. The government doesn't want this on their balance sheet, right? Because it looks bad. So they're going to put it on the balance sheet of companies, and then the government is, in the financial parlance, going to stand behind those companies.
Guarantee them.
So they don't go bust. But will it be paid for by general taxation over the coming 10, 20 years, or by additions to energy bills over the coming 10, 20 years? My thought is that it will probably be paid for out of general taxation. Why? Because if you put it on energy bills, the poor pay disproportionately more for their energy.
OK, thank you.
Right.
Thank you, Liam. And I'm going to bring Catherine, our political reporter, back in. And I'm going to stay with that because I think this is where the political argument goes on this energy price freeze. Both parties now seem to accept it. It was proposed, first of all, by the Liberal Democrats, then the Labour Party. Some form of it will be introduced by Liz Truss. The Labour Party say, more, just tax the profits, just hit the energy and oil companies to get them to pay for it. It seems that the taxpayer is going to at least have to fund some of it, according to Liam, and from what we understand. Do you see that row? How's that row going to play out?
Yeah, that does seem to be the dividing line now, doesn't it? Because, of course, Keir Starmer has been pushing for this since mid-August, and now the Conservatives have said, OK, yes, we're going to go ahead with this. But Labour were always clear this would be paid for by a windfall tax on energy firms. Now, I was talking to a senior Labour advisor yesterday, and they were saying, yeah, we're very glad that they're taking this on board, but who is going to pay for this? Because Liz Truss has been very clearly against windfall taxes. She wants to reverse the rise on corporation tax. She wants to be pro-business. She wants to be supportive of business. She wants to be encouraging growth. So it does sound like, ultimately, the bill is not going to be paid for by businesses. It is likely to be paid for by the government, which ultimately is the British taxpayer. So it is us. So while I think it will be very welcome news to everybody who would have been totally panicking about how am I going to pay £7,000, a lot of people, most people don't have access to that sort of money come next year. I think there will be a real concern that sooner or later it is going to be us that's footing the bill for that.
Is there also a danger, and Liam has touched on this before, where we're looking at the value of the pound, for instance, that the international money markets and others think we're starting to live beyond our means, that we are more akin to an emerging economy when we look at the financial situation. And that, on top of the energy issue, is something that the government's going to have to address, i.e. get some kind of economic credence internationally.
Yes, absolutely. And there have been warnings during the campaign, haven't there? Rishi Sunak has always been saying, we can't put this on the credit card, talking about inflation being stoked. Inflation is at 10%. It's going to go probably to 18, possibly even 20% next year. That's going to erode all of our living standards massively. So I think the markets are concerned. The pound has dropped to something like a 40-year low against the dollar. I think there was a little bit of a bounce this morning with the news that there's going to be an energy freeze. But I think there is a lot of worry and a lot of uncertainty, and we are racking up big bills.
Yeah.
And we also know, because she made various commitments during the campaign, so we know that national insurance rise that was introduced by the government, she's going to reverse that, isn't she? It's not going to help everybody, though, is it?
No, it's not. And how do you square the circle? Obviously, huge amounts of money are needed to help people and businesses get through this winter. There really is no alternative. But Liz Truss has very clearly said she wants to be a low tax, low state, free market Prime Minister.
So how much will this, where we're seeing here Boris saying goodbye to number 10, how much will we be saying goodbye to Johnsonism, if that's something that we can describe, in this will be a very different approach in number 10. I mean, she's held quite a few cabinet roles. She's been an administrator as such in that respect, but she's not got the pizzazz, if you like, and the booster rocket, as Boris describes himself, falling back to earth.
Yes, no, a very different feel and a very different outlook, and I would say clearly much more to the right than Boris Johnson was. Boris Johnson wasn't particularly ideological. He was fairly flexible, really. He would go with what was necessary. So we saw a lot of big spending, and it will be very interesting to see.
And when we look at the political fortunes of both the major parties, there's opinion polls all the time. What can you tell us about the party standing right now, today? She's not had a chance to do anything yet, so it can change very, very quickly. But what she has been appointed Prime Minister formally now by the Queen. She is now our Prime Minister. Of course, as soon as we get those pictures, we will bring them to you. But what's the state of the parties on her first day in the job? Oh, we can see her. There we go. The audience with the Queen, the first of many audiences with the Queen.
We assume that's just after the curtsy, the handshake after the curtsy. Because
could it be just before or after?
Yeah. The kissing of the hands is the way it's described. That doesn't actually take place anymore. But just to reiterate, this is the main drawing room at Balmoral. It's not Buckingham Palace, so that's why both Liz Truss and Boris Johnson travelled the 1,100-mile round trip to Scotland. The last time that happened, just to remind you, I think we said was 1885. But that's the moment that we have got a new Prime Minister heading back, we're told, 2 o'clock to London, expected then with a speech at Downing Street at 4 o'clock. I have to say, the Queen looks fairly relaxed there, doesn't she?
Isn't it great to see the Queen?
Yeah.
It's great to see her. So, it happened. It's all official. Yeah. Liz Truss is our new Prime Minister. I am told that we can now speak to Labour's shadow business spokesperson, Bill Esterson, who is live in Westminster for us. It'll be a difficult time for the Labour Party, actually, because they have struggled to get a hearing, really, throughout this contest. And of course, all eyes are now on the Prime Minister. But for now, all eyes are on Bill Esterson from Labour. So, Bill Esterson, Liz Truss is going to introduce, as you campaign for, along with the Liberal Democrats, a freeze in our energy prices. Job done.
Well, Gloria, it's lovely to talk to you. It's a shame you're not here in person, actually. It's a beautiful day. You'd be having a whale of a time out here. I'm sure you are in the studio. Look, you talked about a difficult time. The people who are facing these astronomical rises in their energy bills are the ones who face a difficult time. And you're right, we've called for an energy price freeze for the last 3 weeks. Keir Starmer announced our plan. And in a sense, I'm pleased that Liz Truss appears to be accepting that we're right about the energy price freeze. But the problem with it is that she is going to saddle people with debt for the next 20 years with higher energy bills over that period to pay for this debt, instead of going for the windfall tax and the excess profits being made by the oil and gas companies, which is our plan for supporting people facing these high energy bills. And I think it shows totally the wrong sense of priority. Our priority is to be on the side of bill payers. Liz Truss, I'm afraid, and the Tory party are on the side of the oil and gas industry, an industry, of course, that Liz Truss worked in.
Know that many economists say Labour's figures did not add up, as we've just been discussing with Liam Halligan in the studio here. $5 billion being raised by the windfall tax at the moment. This plan to freeze the energy prices at the existing cap for 2 years could cost $100 billion. A windfall tax is not going to come anywhere near that.
Well, they certainly haven't costed it, other than that future generations are going to have to pay through a higher bills for 20 years, and that can't be right. It can't be right that people are just going to face higher and higher bills. The idea with our plan was to take away the worry. People wouldn't have to pay a penny more this winter, and the price cap would stay in place.
And I think
that takes away the worry. It gives people peace of mind. Sorry, just to finish the point.
Yeah, of course.
I think that's a really important difference, because the problem with what Liz Truss is proposing is it doesn't give people peace of mind. It does the opposite. It tells them that effectively they've now got a mortgage, an energy mortgage to the future for 20 years of higher energy bill payments, and that can't be right. And we're not.
How long will you be able, under the Labour plan,
profits.
How long would you be able to freeze prices? How much or how long does the windfall tax and the cash you raise from that, how long would you be able to freeze prices from the money you raise?
It's a really important question, Gloria, because we identified that the next 6 months are crucial, and the energy price freeze would give people that peace of mind through the winter months. But there's more to our plan than that. Our plan also would retrofit with energy efficiency measures 19 million homes, and that would knock £1,000 a year off energy bills at current prices. If the government had adopted our plan that Keir Starmer announced a year ago, 2 million homes would have had the advantage of those £1,000 lower energy bills already. But our plan goes a lot further. It moves us away from a reliance on oil and gas. I'm afraid that the Liz Truss approach will make us more reliant on fossil fuels and still leave us exposed to the problem.
Quite tie up with what we're understanding they're looking at. That is that Liz Truss is also going to try and persuade.
Hang on.
Yeah, I'm hanging on.
Let's just finish the point, because the key point is we've got to get away from oil and gas and onto renewables. We would double offshore wind. We would end the moratorium on onshore wind. We'd make those decisions on new nuclear that magically Boris Johnson made at the 11.5 hour when he could have done it any time, or his government could have done it any time in the last 12 years. We'd increase solar, and no, Liz Truss, solar does not stop farmers. Farmers have dual use. Farmers benefit from solar farms because they get the extra revenue. And we would also look at tidal in places like my constituency in the Liverpool City region, where we've got very, very good, exciting plans there too. That's got to be. Well,
if you can just hang on for just one moment for me to make this point on behalf of Liz Truss's team, who we understand are also trying to persuade the nuclear and renewable industries to take 15-year contracts at fixed prices, i.e. below the current inflated market rates. That's not something we've heard from Labour.
The problem with Liz Truss is she wants fracking, she wants more extraction from the North Sea, both of which don't solve.
No, I'm sorry. This is nuclear. This is nuclear and renewable. They're quite specific on that.
Well, when I've seen the plan, I'll be able to comment in more detail. Why has it taken them 12 years to take these decisions on nuclear? Why have they had this moratorium on onshore wind?
Bill.
Why did they undermine our wind industry, offshore wind industry?
Bill Esterson, may I invite you finally?
Yeah.
to say something perhaps nice about the fact that we will probably, almost certainly, have the most diverse cabinet in terms of gender, ethnicity. I think we should talk more about social class, but we'll park that for now. In the history of this great nation, will you give her 2 cheers at least for that?
Well, Gloria, you make, as ever, a very, very important point about social class, and you fought that fight when you were here with me, and you've continued to fight it back in your journalism career. But, of course, it's welcome that we have a diverse representation in government. But what's more important is what they do. And this government has presided over low growth and the highest inflation of any comparable economy. Because of their failures. They've undermined the health service, they've undermined education, and they've undermined public safety with their cuts to the police. So what we need is a change of direction from this government. What we need is an energy plan that deals with the immediate challenges, but also the long-term ones. That means an investment in renewables, it means an investment in energy efficiency measures, as well as that price freeze, and without saddling people with long-term debts.
Bill, last quick thought. Are you still going to be preparing for a general election in the mid-term to near term?
Well, we're always expecting a general election at any time. We welcome it because really the answer to the energy crisis, really the answer to the long-term problems in the health service caused by this government, the problems in education, the problems in policing numbers being cut, the answer to that is a Labour government. So we want an election at the earliest available opportunity so we can deliver on our plans and move this country forward.
Bill Esterson, thank you for joining us today. We were just showing you there's pictures of Liz Truss becoming our Prime Minister as she will be leaving Balmoral as our 3rd female Prime Minister, our 56th Prime Minister now. Sophie Reaper, our North West reporter, is in Bolton right now at the local Conservative club. She's speaking to Conservative Party members. I bet they want a bit of unity back in their party, don't they?
I think they do, and you know, this is somewhere where they're both proud to be Conservative and Northern, something that they share with our new Prime Minister. Throughout her campaign, Liz Truss styled herself as sharing those key Northern values. Of course, there are a lot of issues here in the North, and number one on the list, speaking to people this morning, is of course the cost of living crisis. Now, throughout her campaign, Liz Truss promised to do something about energy bills, and in fact she said she would do something within her first week in office, so that's something we should be hearing about soon. Now, this morning, as I said, I've been speaking to the people on Bolton Market to ask what our new Prime Minister can do for them.
She won't do everything what she says she's going to do. They promise everything and they don't keep to it.
No, what we want a quick, clear review on the energy, particularly side of the things, because bills are already spiraling and skyrocketing and so on. And if nothing is done very, very quickly and soon, everybody will be down.
I think it's the best of the decision for what we've been given. I don't think either of them are quite suitable because we're going to get a lot of promises and I don't think they're going to deliver on most of them.
Well, as we've just heard, there's a lot of mixed reactions here in Bolton. Some people believe that Liz Truss was the right decision, whereas others felt Rishi Sunak would do a better job. As for the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, some people think he should have stayed, whereas others welcome him leaving. There's one thing they can all agree on, though, and that's that now Liz Truss is our new Prime Minister, she has to deliver for the people of the North.
Live from Bolton, thank you.
Well, let's just reflect that we are now talking about officially a new Prime Minister. The deed has been done at Balmoral. We saw those pictures. I think we can bring them up again for you just to show a very relaxed Queen, we have to say, who has invited Liz Truss to form a new administration and therefore has become the new Prime Minister. That's the picture that's been issued in the last few minutes. Historic, Catherine, because another female Tory Prime Minister, but the first time this has happened at Balmoral since, I think, 1885, we were told, when Salisbury became Prime Minister.
Yes, Quite a moment, isn't it? And obviously, the Queen is 96.
Just leaving there, that's the motorcade, heading back to Aberdeen, to the airport. So we're expecting back in Downing Street for a speech, what, about 4 o'clock?
And she's with her husband, isn't she? She'll be with her husband and loads of security that comes with the job. That's going to be quite a drive, quite a moment of reflection and quite a moment of planning, because she's got a big day ahead, hasn't she, Catherine?
Absolutely, absolutely. So speech 4 o'clock or thereabouts, hopefully outside Downing Street, unless the weather makes it impossible, but hopefully, probably quite a brief speech today. She's obviously got a huge, I mean, really, you would wonder who would want to be Prime Minister now.
As the Queen may have asked her.
Plenty of them did, but the tasks that she has ahead are incredibly daunting. Certainly the worst economic situation, certainly since 1979 when Margaret Thatcher came in, maybe even more because, of course, we've got a war in Europe as well. So there's huge numbers of issues, the economy, education, health, ambulance waiting times.
Strikes, you name it, the list
inflation.
goes on.
It is,
really
I mean, I don't know how she even gets out of bed, but obviously she is champing at the bit and very excited and has made big plans, which we will be hearing about shortly, let's hope, because we all want to know what's happening with energy bills.
When do we find out who's in her top team officially? There's loads of speculation out there, isn't there?
There's a lot of briefing already. I mean, we know, for example, that Kwasi Kwarteng is going to be Chancellor and James Cleverly likely to be Foreign Secretary, Suella Braverman Home Secretary. We don't know that officially, but from this afternoon. So after the speech, she will get on with a cabinet reshuffle. We're expecting a massive clear out, very few people still to remain in post. Of course, Priti Patel resigned last night. Obviously, she knew the way the wind was blowing. Nadine Dorries too, although Nadine Dorries had been offered Culture Secretary. We saw her resignation letter on Twitter. But yes, all change.
Let's go back to Balmoral, to Cameron Walker, because for the moment, the action is still where Cameron is, at Balmoral.
Yep, Liz Truss has just left the Balmoral estate. In the last couple of minutes, Buckingham Palace have released another statement. It says the Queen received an audience, Right Honourable Elizabeth Truss MP today, and requested her to form a new administration. Miss Truss accepted Her Majesty's offer and kissed hands upon her appointment as Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury. So there we have it. Liz Truss is officially the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, the Queen's 15th Prime Minister of her reign. And Liz Truss is now expected to go back to Aberdeen Airport, fly back to London, and then kind of get given the keys to number 10 Downing Street, where she will read a speech, we expect. Of course, this is the first time that the Queen has appointed a new Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle. In the last kind of, half an hour or so, we've actually received a couple of images of Her Majesty the Queen meeting Liz Truss in the drawing room. She is seen smiling. She was using a walking stick, but she seemed to be in pretty good spirits. Now, Buckingham Palace won't go into any more details as to why she is using a walking stick, but we do know that the original plan, it's thought, was that the Queen would make the 1,000-mile round journey to London to appoint her new Prime Minister, but due to those episodic mobility problems, as the palace described, which I think to your eye means perhaps she has good days and bad days with her movements, the decision was taken that the Queen would appoint her new Prime Minister at Balmoral Castle, and that is, we've been told, to provide certainty for the Prime Minister's diary, because the thought was that if she was due to travel down to London and then last minute she woke up in the morning and realised that her movements was not as good as it could be, then last minute travel arrangements would need to be made for the new Prime Minister to travel up very quickly to Balmoral, which would become a bit of a, let's be frank, logistical nightmare. So that's why the decision was taken. There's no constitutional reason as to why it cannot happen at Balmoral Castle. The Queen's great-grandfather, Edward VI, VII actually appointed one of his prime ministers while he was on holiday in France because he didn't want to interrupt his holiday to come back to London to appoint the new prime minister. But questions are inevitably now going to be asked about Her Majesty's health and her ability to move. Prince Charles, a few months ago, read the Queen's speech on her behalf in the House of Lords. There's no indication that her health has deteriorated at all over the summer, really. But in the back of our minds, we all know that Her Majesty the Queen is 96 years old. But for now, Liz Truss, our new Prime Minister, is heading back to Aberdeen to fly back to London as she starts on her journey as being Britain's Prime Minister.
And she will certainly be hoping not to take that reign with her. Thank you, Cameron. Thank you. We've still got Catherine in the studio with us, our political reporter.
Yeah, and we're expecting that flight, the Dassault Falcon 900 LX, apparently. One of the...
We all know what that is.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. There, in fact, there's two of them. The first one there is Boris Johnson, we understand, heading back to London. They are travelling separately because of security concerns. The understanding is that when Liz Truss gets on board the second jet, she will get a briefing from all her security people, basically bringing her up to speed, because there are certain things that only a Prime Minister obviously is told, Catherine, and she will be brought up to speed with that before she gets back to London.
Yes, she obviously has had a lot of time to plan, but as you say, there are certain things that you cannot know until you are in the job. So yesterday, 24 hours since she knew that she was definitively going to be Prime Minister, brief celebrations yesterday, but now the hard work begins, and obviously they have to travel separately because in case of any terrible event, for anybody saying, well, what a terrible...
As the royal family, quite often as well.
Exactly, because they are critical people to our country, so absolutely, yes.
I just was wondering how much this has cost in terms of 2 flights of executive jets, plus all the cars and the Range Rovers that have got them up there and then ferry them to and from the airport. This has been a pretty costly operation, one wonders.
I'm sure we will be hearing, I'm sure that will be a story that will run shortly. But I think, I know there's a lot of division, people have very different views, but I don't think many people in the country would begrudge the Queen doing this from Balmoral.
Absolutely.
She is 96.
Absolutely.
So I think it's a bit bar humbug to, sure, a lot of money's been...
And she'll have to talk to lots of world leaders. That's something that just all that this is arranged for you in your first days of the job. And Prime Ministers, new Prime Ministers, they have different approaches to the world stage. I mean, I remember being a political journalist when Tony Blair was Prime Minister, and my goodness, we spent a lot of time on aeroplanes. But very much domestically focused is what the country will... That's where the country will want Liz Truss's attention to be. Boris Johnson spent a lot of time in Ukraine, really applauded for doing so by many, but the job... There is a big job to do here at home, isn't there, Catherine?
Yes, absolutely. And, of course, she's been Foreign Secretary, as had Boris Johnson before he became Prime Minister. Yes. So she's already very well used to going around the world, shaking hands with leaders, having these conversations. She hasn't been... She was strangely undiplomatic the other day, wasn't she, when she was asked about Macron, whether he was a friend or foe, and she said the jury's out.
Still out,
which I did think was an interesting comment to make. And obviously there's many challenges with foreign policy and the war in Ukraine, but absolutely her number one priority will be cost of living, because it is the issue that pretty much everyone in the country, apart from probably a few billionaires, are seriously concerned about and needs action on immediately.
Let's just remind you what you're watching. These are live shots from Aberdeen Airport. That plane behind there, about to take off, will have Boris Johnson and his wife Carrie on board. She was also attending Balmoral to tender his resignation as Prime Minister. The jet in the foreground, another Dassault Falcon private jet, that's waiting for Liz Truss to go back to London as the new Prime Minister. But this is the last act of Boris Johnson in this handover of power at Balmoral, which, of course, normally takes place at Buckingham Palace. It's interesting, this has happened all north of the border.
I was just going to say, Mark,
there
you
it
can
goes.
imagine...
Taking off.
So that plane contains...
That's Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson.
And you can imagine the different emotions on those two very similar-looking planes as one political career comes to an end, or does it? We'll ask Catherine about that in just a moment. And one prime ministerial career, the 56th Prime Minister of Britain.
Oh, off into the low cloud. That's going to be a bit of a bumpy trip for them getting back to London.
Have we heard the last of Boris Johnson in a senior political role?
Oh. Have we heard of the last of Boris Johnson? Categorically not. Have we seen the last of him in a senior political role? Let's wait and see. Let's wait and see. I mean, it was very noticeable, wasn't it, in the speech that he said Liz Truss would have his fervent support. Now's the time to put politics behind. Well, yeah, good luck with that. But also, he just can't resist, can he? He's not... He clearly hasn't let it go because he's leaving...
Well, there was this reference to Cincinnatus, who was this Roman patrician who returned to
then
power.
Came back in the country's hour of need, which he obviously knows because he studied the classics. And also, earlier in the speech, when he said, you know, the baton's been passed in a relay and they changed their rules partway through, well, never mind about that. Well, so... Obviously, despite all the humour and the... You know, he gave a very boisterous speech, didn't he? But he's obviously still cross and... He feels that he has been removed unjustly, and there are many Tory voters and Tory members that feel the same. So...
Is this going to be a problem for Liz Truss? I know that David Mellor, speaking here on GB News, indicated that she really needed to do a lot of work on her presentational skill, as did Margaret Thatcher, of course. Tim Bell did a lot of work with her to lower her voice, to slow her speech down. She is not a natural performer, as we saw in that acceptance speech. There's a big gulf between her approach and how Boris Johnson carried these things off.
Yes, she's very different, isn't she? I would say I think she's come a long way since the beginning of the campaign. I mean, at the very start, her speeches were very stilted. She was very awkward. She has grown in the role. I would say she's much, much better. But still, she's certainly not a natural speaker. She doesn't have the gift of the gab the way with the words that Boris Johnson, although... To be honest, who does? I mean, some of the allusions, some of the things he comes out with, we're not going to see that
Pig
again.
World, we remember that speech, yeah.
Catherine, we'll talk to you throughout the day, Catherine Foster, our political reporter. Now we're going to cross over to Downing Street, where our GB News political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is. Tom, it's quite extraordinary, actually. When Liz Truss entered this contest, she was by no means the favourite. People thought in that first hustings that she performed quite poorly. She has gone on to take the crown. I think that tells us quite a bit about her character and her resilience, actually.
Yes, it's a fascinating campaign looking at it, although I would put one qualifier on the fact that Liz Truss did start behind a number of other candidates in those MP rounds. It's that Liz Truss represents a certain tradition of the Conservative Party, someone on the free market right of the party that saw its vote split between several candidates. Also vying in that space, for example, were people like Kemi Badenoch at the early stages, Nadhim Zawahi as well. So really what we're looking at is a situation where the rounds started eliminating further candidates and those votes went to Liz Truss. I suppose partly because of her clever campaign and, as you rightly say, the way that she grew through that campaign, but also simply due to the maths in the House. It was easier to see how certain MPs would switch to Liz Truss, whereas others would not. And so when candidates like Suella Braverman or Kemi Badenoch dropped out, these votes went to Liz Truss. Perhaps the maths looked more predictable than was first seen, because also, if we've been looking at the Conservative Home approval ratings, they poll or they do a survey of the readership of that website, Conservative Home, every month, showing the rankings of cabinet members. Liz Truss, for a long, long time, was at or near the top of those rankings. She's shot to being a darling of the grassroots due to her role as first Chief Secretary to the Treasury, when she started speaking out on so many fiscal issues, when she started really expressing her view as this person of the free market right, if anything, a slightly libertarian individual within cabinet. She started being much more vocal from around 2017, certainly after the 2017 general election. And then, of course, under Boris Johnson, her role as Trade Secretary, zooming around the world and signing dozens of trade deals before the United Kingdom formally left the European Union, something that many on the Remain side of the argument said could never be done. And Liz Truss secured this record of delivery, really, something that propelled her to a great office of state, the role of Foreign Secretary, clearly building her credentials with particularly the Conservative grassroots, who has seen her as someone who they really do value and favour in all of these surveys. By contrast, Rishi Sunak, actually, despite many people in the Westminster bubble saying how slick a performer he is and how credible he is as a future Prime Minister, if we looked at the surveys of the Conservative Party membership, we really saw his approval rating take a dive after introducing that national insurance tax hike. So potentially this race was in many ways sealed up long before the campaign began. We can see so many different indicators looking back with the benefit of hindsight in terms of where the Conservative Party membership was, and indeed, frankly, where the parliamentary party was too. Perhaps this situation was more predictable than people thought.
Number 10, thank you very much indeed for that, where we're expecting, of course, Liz Truss to be back for a speech probably about 4 o'clock, and Tom will keep an eye on the weather for us to see whether that lectern will be back out in Downing Street. But, of course, you just saw the pictures there of the moment that we had our new Prime Minister. Yes, it's now official. Liz Truss has been asked to form a new government and accepted, and we'll be hearing from that new Prime Minister and who's in the Cabinet later this afternoon.
We'll be back.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV,
on radio and online.
we're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
So Liz Truss is our new Prime Minister. Boris Johnson is
gone.
No more.
Gone into the air.
It was a departure. We saw him depart Downing Street this morning, and an MP who was there, Craig McKinley, the Conservative MP, was there for all the action. Craig, you backed Liz Truss, but just tell me about the atmosphere, about how you felt this morning. As you were one of the lucky ones, you can tell us how you got that ticket later, to say farewell at Downing Street to Boris Johnson.
Well, it was quite a sad day. Well, it was sad. I mean, I can't say anything but that, really. We had Boris boosterism right to the last, and he kept it all together. You know, that same bounding enthusiasm going over what he felt were his achievements during his last 3 years, and they were significant. I mean, Gloria, you were there at the back end of the last Parliament when it was completely bound up with Brexit rows, couldn't leave without a deal, giving the EU that strengthened hand, and, you know, we managed to get a deal which was acceptable to me and other colleagues of Brexit persuasion. Not perfect, of course, but we were given a bag of fudge and we did the best of what we could. We then were knocked off course by COVID. I mean, it would have knocked anybody off course, but we did good things with that. We managed to accelerate the vaccine rollout. You know, that was a success. But we've got a lot of problems. We know that. We've got a massive problem with energy security and energy cost. We've got problems with the border crossings in my patch, in my part of the world, down in Kent from Calais. We've got problems with NHS. We've got massive problems with policing, in my view. So they are the inheritance for Liz Truss to pick up now that she's in post. But, you know, what Boris delivered, I don't think can be undervalued. Biggest majority since 1987. Brexit done, you know, pretty much in a way that I'm satisfied with. And you know what? I think in a couple of years people will say, why did Boris go? What happened? And I think it'll almost be prompted to say, well, it started with Partygate. And I'm already sort of getting that in my patch. People saying, well, why is he gone? But anyway, that's the stuff of yesteryear. So that was a bit of a sad morning. As he went out the gates with the police escort, it felt a little bit, I mean, very different, but felt a little bit like when you're, when you're at a cremation service and the curtains close. It had that sort of slight feel about it. But I was with colleagues that were obviously of the same mind, that were supportive of Boris, and it was a very happy atmosphere. You know, there was clapping, there was cheering, and thanks for what he's done. But we're now on a new page. And you know that I had my concerns about many of Boris's policies. We've got highest tax rates for 70 years. Rishi had put through that national insurance right that I voted against, not many Conservatives did. I've been against that corporation tax rise, and I made a very robust speech against the windfall tax. Now, I hope Liz's agenda, and what she said so far, I think that's to be believed, a lot of this can be wound back. Because if we want a dynamic economy, mine is very clear. You want to take a smaller slice out of a bigger pie. And I'm afraid the orthodoxy we've seen for too long is taking a bigger slice out of a pie that's not getting any bigger. That, to me, and I hope, is going to be the Liz Truss orthodoxy, and we can get back to being a proper Conservative party, pushing Conservative policies, and that's the way that we have every opportunity of winning the next general election. So I'm quite excited.
Yeah, on that very topic, how long has she got when we're looking at the various polls that John Curtis has outlined? Survation, Labour 46 point lead, or 46 to 29 over the Tories when Liz Truss was mentioned as being the new leader. Opinion and YouGovernment, YouGov 65% feeling that Liz Truss is out of touch. I mean, she's got a huge mountain to climb to get to a general election victory.
Well, you know, come on, it's the first day. Polls come and go. Let's see some delivery over the next few months. And I think a lot is going to be judged on how we deal with the cost of living crisis, the energy cost crisis. And I think we're going to have some very positive news about that over the course of probably this week or the very start of next week. Something very strong has got to be put in place because those big bills are going to land as they are on the 1st of October. I think everybody recognises these are costs that just cannot be borne by the public. And you know what? This is really what Putin has done is the icing on the cake of a failed energy policy in this country for 25 years, which started with Tony Blair in 1997 saying that there is no economic place for new nuclear. So
Craig,
I think
I want to look forward, if I may, because we're running out of time.
Ideas about energy.
Could I just look forward to the cabinet reshuffle that is coming? Now, we all know about that phrase, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. It looks like she's nailed the first bit. What about the second bit? Do you need to keep your enemies closer? Does she need to appoint some of those who didn't back her to senior positions in the government this afternoon?
Well, do you know, Gloria, that's a very interesting question, and it's something that I've thought about in the last few days. And do you know what all Prime Ministers try and do? They try and keep everybody in the camp. Everybody has, from Major right the way through. Everybody tries to be everything to everyone. And do you know what? The seeds of that, I think, the seeds of Boris's downfall. Do you know what I would do if I was in his shoes? I'd pick a team. Pick a team, get your team on board and use them and use those strengths. You can't be everything to everyone. I think previous Prime Ministers have now seen that. I would prefer, whether it's a left of centre team or a right of centre team, obviously prefer a right of centre one. She's got to stick to that team, nurture that team. And I'm afraid to say, if others are not happy with that, well, they'll just have to have a grumble and groan on the back benches. We need a united Conservative Party of right of centre, in my view, with Conservative policies that, frankly, I don't think we've seen properly since 1991.
Tough talk there. Craig McKinley, Conservative MP, Liz Truss backer. Thank you.
Groaning on the backbenches, who'd have thought it? We'll see. But, of course, let's reflect the UK's third female Prime Minister now taking office. And another woman who could one day perhaps take that top job has been reacting to Liz Truss's appointment and Boris Johnson's departure.
The Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner, said the Conservatives are responsible for many of the challenges the country is currently facing.
Well, if you heard Boris Johnson's speech this morning, you'd think everything was rosy and great. But actually, the legacy is scandal, sleaze, the highest inflation for decades, cost of living crisis, people's standard of living going down. We've seen the highest tax burden on the UK, and we've seen GP waiting lists going up. We've seen the NHS engulfed in a crisis. We've seen our public services really demoralised. He talked about levelling up. He talked about rail, in Northern Rail has been levelled down. We've seen levelling down across the United Kingdom. And partying when people, quite frankly, couldn't see their relatives. And there was no acknowledgement of the scandalous behaviour from Boris Johnson. And, of course, Liz Truss was part of that cabinet. So I thought it was astonishing that he thought it was a good laugh to say, bye, I've been a rocket and it's been great, when actually it hasn't been a rocket. It's been a damp squib and everyone's poorer as a result of it. I mean, Boris Johnson is all about him. I think he'll be always in the background or in the foreground or wherever else he wants to be, because he sees it as a bit of a laugh for him. This has always been what he considers to be his privileged destiny. And actually, if we look at the reality of what the British public face now and the UK faces, is that it's been disastrous for us. A lot of broken promises, and there's a lot of work to do now to deal with the cost of living crisis that people face. And Liz Truss' plan seems to be to adopt Labour's position of freezing the energy cap at the moment, so people are not paying more, but to put that burden back onto the taxpayers and to increase debt. What Labour has said is that we should have a windfall tax on gas and oil companies that pays for this freeze, but we need a longer term solution to look at renewables, to retrofit homes, to make sure that our energy is self-sufficient and that our homes are as energy efficient as they possibly can be. There's been no plan from the Conservatives around that. Boris Johnson says we're going to have nuclear energy every year. 12 years we've had the Conservatives in power and they've done nothing but create the crisis that we now face at the moment. Well, my aspiration is that, first of all, we don't have the sleaze and the scandal, but of course Liz Truss has propped up the Prime Minister and has voted with the Prime Minister to support, whether it was the Owen Paterson scandal, whether it was the situation that we saw with the £1 billion of wasted contracts that were given out. I want to see a real clear up and make sure that we have standards in public life, the Nolan principles again, but also that we look at what people are facing. And I think that Liz Truss is she's out of touch with what's happening on the ground because of the comments she's made. People are not working hard enough. That it doesn't matter if the rich get richer. When we've seen inequality growing in the UK, we need real help and investment for our UK businesses that are struggling and for our households at the moment. And I want to see her rocket fuel that rather than opposed to these empty sound bites that we've heard from Boris Johnson. Again, the UK were promised as we leave the European Union that standards would improve, that people's living standards would improve in the UK. What this government are showing is that they want to level down the UK at the moment. We don't want a low-wage economy where people are in poverty and having to go to food banks when they're in work. We've got a programme, I've got a green paper on the future of work that is about improving standards. If you're a good employer in the UK, Labour will invest in your business, but will also make sure that people have good employment contracts that mean that they can live and raise their family and have, you know, reasonable standards of living. We don't want people having to visit food banks. We want good standards of employment, and good employers know this and they know it's good for business. And we've got a programme, a green paper that's ready to go to make that happen. We don't want to see watering down the standards in the UK because we already have some of the lowest employment standards across the European Union. We want to boost employment and growth, and we want to boost the rewards that the people of this country deliver for the economy through their hard work every day. Labour have always supported the right to strike. It's a basic right. It's a right to withdraw their labour. What we want to do, though, is prevent us getting into that situation. It's a failure if you end up in that situation. As a trade union official myself, if we ended up in industrial action, it was the last resort. We didn't want to have to ask our members to do that, and members don't want to do that. They deliver good public services. They want to continue to do that. So the government really do need to step up to prevent this situation from happening. All they've done is ramped it up, actually, and the rhetoric that's coming out of government is about deliberately stoking up these flames of distrust and disunity. What we want to do is bring people together around the table, improve the standard of living for people and support British industry.
Angela Rayner speaking to us on GB News a little earlier, bringing a pretty comprehensive reaction to the fact that we have a new Prime Minister, Liz Truss, having taken place a few minutes, or about half an hour ago in Balmoral.
Much more to come on GB Newsday shortly. We'll be speaking with GB News Home and Security Editor Mark White on what Liz Truss's plans could mean for policing, Rwanda and Ukraine. First, it's your news update with Rosie.
Thanks, Gloria. It's 1:32. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. As we've been hearing, Liz Truss is now the country's new Prime Minister. She's had an audience with the Queen at Balmoral Castle and was invited to form a new government. Well, this afternoon, she's expected to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. She's also due to name her new cabinet. Well, earlier, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Boris Johnson had tendered his resignation, which Her Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. Mr Johnson and his wife Carrie spent almost 40 minutes with the monarch before leaving Balmoral. Earlier, outside Number 10, he promised his fervent support to his successor, saying Liz Truss and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why, this is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it, and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
In some other news now, a man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth Police says a suspect vehicle was being chased and officers deliberately crashed into the car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. The Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. Official sources have told GB News Albanian criminal gangs are risking a major tragedy by pushing small boats into the English Channel in poor weather. Despite deteriorating conditions, Ministry of Defence figures show 188 people crossed into UK waters yesterday, and today at least 3 small boats have been intercepted. We're on your TV, we're online and on your radio. This is GB News. Don't go anywhere. Mark and Gloria will be back in a moment.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Welcome back to GB Newsday. We're expecting, of course, the cabinet changes later today as Liz Truss returns to Downing Street. But already, Priti Patel stepping down as the UK's Home Secretary. Liz Truss was expected to remove her from that position, but Priti Patel insisting on leaving government as her only choice, she said.
She also said it was vital that Ms Truss backed all aspects of the policy she put in place on illegal migration, including her Rwanda policy. Well, our Home and Security Editor Mark White is with us. Liz Truss said during the campaign she's somebody who gets things done. She's said on record she will continue the Rwanda scheme. Does it work?
Well, it's not working so far because no one has been sent. But yes, you're right. She said during her campaign that she was wedded to the Rwanda scheme. More than that, actually, that she wanted to expand it out to include other countries that might be willing to take asylum seekers as well. So we've currently got this situation, of course, in the courts, at the High Court, a judicial review into whether this Rwanda policy is lawful. It's a 5-day hearing, but at the end of the 5-day hearing, we won't get a judgment. We've got another hearing related to this brought on behalf of another group of asylum seekers in October. And we're told then there'll be reserved judgment. So there might not be a decision on this until at least November. And all of the while, more people are coming on small boats. Yesterday, another 188 came across, despite the fact it's pretty horrendous conditions out in the channel with 30-mile-an-hour winds gusting, choppy seas. But they're being pushed out by the criminal gangs, and some real concern that we might actually see a tragedy like we did last November when 27 people drowned when their boat capsized because of the weather conditions.
We're expecting perhaps Suella Braverman to be the new Home Secretary, and it's interesting, of course, because she was Attorney General, giving the government legal advice on whether the Rwanda thing could actually happen. So that's a bit of added spice, if you like. But the other aspect is whoever's going to be Foreign Secretary, again, it could be James Cleverly, trying to have to build bridges with the French to address this the other side of the Channel.
Well, there's no doubt that the French cooperation here is vital, I think. Without a Rwanda deal happening anytime soon, it really needs to be the French who are getting to grips with the situation on the other side, or maybe agreeing to those coming across here to be returned to their soil. That has not happened yet.
Yeah.
Didn't happen under Priti Patel. There's no reason to believe, sadly, that it's going to happen under James Cleverly if he becomes Foreign Secretary, Suella Braverman if she becomes the Home Secretary, Liz Truss and her premiership. So it will be interesting to see where we go with that, but it is a big issue in the in-tray for Liz Truss and, of course, for whoever the new Home Secretary will be now that Priti Patel has decided to go.
And, of course, crime, policing more generally. What has Liz Truss told us about the number of police officers on our streets, how the police should respond to things like burglaries? What's her mantra when it comes to crime and law and order?
Well, we remember again from her campaign, she was talking about back to basics policing. She wants police, she said, not to be policing the Twitter sphere, but to be actually investigating and dealing with real crime. That's not gone down too well with police forces who say, actually, officers that I've been speaking to, that really this is just, going after the soundbite. It makes, a very good soundbite, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really mean much because police forces aren't really policing Twitter in that sense. Yes, of course, every now and again, a ridiculous case comes to the fore and it's splattered all over the
Because it's so rare. That's why it gets so much attention.
In the scheme of things,
And the other thing that's not gone down well is this idea for league tables to come back to compare the various police forces and how they're handling such crimes.
Yeah, no, a very good point. Richard Lewis, who is the Association of Chief Police Officers national lead on performance in terms of trying to get, the police tackling crime better. He said that these performance tables can actually be counterproductive in that chief constables are chasing targets all of the time. They were abandoned by the Labour government just because of that, because you got chief constables putting crimes that are maybe a bit more difficult to solve
on the back burner
at a lower priority and going after the ones that
the easy fixes.
The government is trying to sort of target and get chief constables to do. So of course, targets are not popular with chief constables. Sound bites suggesting that police aren't really investigating real crime aren't popular. But of course, politicians, very well, Gloria,
I always spoke
love to grab a headline.
You know that.
You get a good headline out of something like not policing Twitter.
But also the problem for politicians is getting those good headlines and then not following through. That's what politicians of all colours are always criticised for. They talk, they don't deliver. But Liz Truss says she is someone who gets things done.
Yes,
deliver, we remember.
Proof will be in the pudding, as that old cliche goes.
Mark, as ever, thanks very much for bringing us up to speed with all that.
So Boris Johnson travelled to Balmoral this morning to formally offer his resignation to the Queen, while Liz Truss has replaced him as the Prime Minister. He will still be the MP for Uxbridge and South Ruislip.
Yes, well, our reporter Alice Porter is in Uxbridge for us. And Alice, let's reflect. It's not the greatest of majorities he's got there, of course. What has people's reaction been there to the events of today?
Well, I think it's been as grey and moody as the weather that's unfortunately just turned. A lot of people are not a fan of Boris Johnson as a constituency MP, and they've told me that repeatedly when I've been here so many times over the last few months, getting people's reactions to issues to do with Owen Paterson, issues to do with lobbying, issues to do with Partygate. I've asked people here so many times what the reaction is, and a lot of people have been very frustrated with him as a constituency MP and say that he's not done enough to tackle issues such as the local police station closing, or just last month, 3 state-run nurseries are being closed. A lot of people say they've written to Boris Johnson trying to get him to address that, and they say that he hasn't. But in the same breath, there have been people who've also been incredibly loyal to Boris Johnson. I've had just as many people come up to me over the last few months when I've come here and say, that he's been smeared by the media, saying that actually, yes, no one's perfect, but actually he's the best person, to particularly in regards to sort of the Ukraine crisis, believing living, he's the best person to sort of stand up to Putin. So it's really sort of difficult to judge how any constituency sort of feels in regards to their local MP, but I can safely say the number of times I've been here, it's been very split. I've been out and about this morning speaking to people, trying to get their reaction to Boris Johnson's resignation, and this is what they had to say.
Basically, I think he's going to be missed in some ways, and I hope he's going to stay in Parliament. I mean, he's no idiot, is he?
I don't kind of agree with it because I thought he was doing a very good job for the last couple of years, particularly during the COVID pandemic, where the government acted very quickly to put policies and programs in place to help people, whether it's vaccine rollout.
It's sad. I don't know why I had to resign. It's not fair. He was doing so well, helping us out of Brexit and dealing with COVID. All this came just as he took office, and now poor Liz Truss has got to deal with the energy crisis.
I think it had to happen. He lost the confidence of the public, and he lost the confidence of his team as well, like the cabinet as well. So if you haven't got support, there was a vote of confidence, but it was probably one of the lowest figures in history, and history suggests that he had to go.
There you go. There were some of Boris Johnson's constituents speaking to me there. But I think they also raised the sort of question there. What exactly is going to happen to Boris Johnson now? I mean, is he going to become a backbencher? Is he going to be involved with his constituency? Bearing in mind, he's not from Uxbridge. And I think that's an important point to stress there, that he's not actually from the local area. And so some people feel he's not been involved with the local areas they like, and therefore don't necessarily feel confident. And also, I think it's important to stress here that it could be a situation where Labour may want to take this seat in the election, because in the last election he only won by a majority of just over 7,000, and in the election before that in 2017 he got a majority of just over 5,000, which is in fact the smallest majority for any sitting Prime Minister since 1924. So on the one hand, Uxbridge and South Ruislip is sort of seen as the safe Tory seat ever since it was created in 2010, but on the other hand it could be that Labour are going to maybe use this as an opportunity to try and take the seat for the first time, particularly with this cost of living crisis continuing to perhaps change the demographic in the area. It sort of generally has been seen as quite middle class, but again, the number of times that I've been here, you can sort of see that demographic is changing. A lot of people are really struggling with the cost of living here, and I have to say, if there was another election, it may not necessarily go to the Tories.
Yeah, interesting point. Alice, thank you for updating us there at a very busy concourse outside Uxbridge Tube Station. Thanks very much indeed.
Well, joining us now is Martin Pengelly, a Guardian US journalist who shared his school days with Liz Truss at Roundhay School in Leeds.
Thanks very much indeed for joining us, Martin. Let's just reflect that I think she gave Roundhay a bit of a D-, a lack of opportunity, a lack of encouragement. You were sort of saying, well, see me after school, Miss Truss.
In a way, yes. I voiced what I'd heard from a lot of people I was at school with, and a lot of people who were at school around the same time. I was there 3 years after Liz Truss, but friends with her brother, I knew her then. And we generally, us 90s Roundhay alumni, don't agree with the picture of the school that she's painted.
How well did you know her? What can you tell us about the young Liz Truss? How old were you when you knew her? How old was she when you knew her?
Well, she's 3 years older than me. So I was running with her little brother's friends. I was one of the sort of, crowd of annoying friends of her little brother. This is, I'm talking about, early 90s. I knew her pretty well as Chris's older sister, and I liked her, got on with her. She tolerated us. She was notably one of the older siblings who was nicer to us when we were around their house. And then we watched as she went to Oxford and became, climbed the ranks of the Liberal Democrats. I'm not saying we watched it obsessively, but I did study politics when I was in the sixth form, and I was very aware of what she was doing. And then I knew her, saw her here and there in London when we all moved down there, when she moved to the Conservatives, and got on well when we met at parties, had political arguments, but, in good spirit.
Yeah, one reflects it might have actually been rather upsetting for the teaching staff who maybe helped a lot of kids to get through Roundhay and achieve success in their lives. What do you think it tells us about Liz Truss, who, as you reflect, was a Liberal Democrat, now becomes a right-wing Tory, was a Remainer and then becomes an arch-Brexiteer. It's an interesting political approach, some may say.
Yes, some may. It's the picture she's painted for a few years now, not just now in the leadership campaign of Roundhay, the area, and Roundhay, the school, is, most people would say, inaccurate. I know the Daily Telegraph found a form of people who said, who backed up what she said about children being let down, and that is absolutely fine because the experiences differ. In terms of the area, in a quick potted version, Liz Truss has said she grew up in a red wall seat. She didn't. It was Conservative from 1955 to 1997. Yeah. I know that because I grew up in a very Labour household. Declaration of bias, there you go. I lived under a Conservative MP my entire life until I voted absentee in the election in 97 and it went Labour. And it's been Labour ever since, that's true.
Martin, you said that you grew up in a Labour household. Liz Truss has said that she grew up in a lefty household too. Her parents were lefties. Were they obviously so?
You can't say lefty. I mean, Roundhay, Leeds North East, it's a split area. There are big stone houses up the hill where me and Liz Truss grew up, which are full, or were full then, of academics, which is her background, teachers background, doctors, so on like that. So there were a lot of Labour voters. I think her family was mostly Lib Dem. I couldn't say for sure. I know she was, and I know her brother was. It was a Liberal area, but represented by a Conservative MP until 97, Timothy Kirkup, now in the House of Lords. It wasn't a loony left area, and it feeds into what she said about the school, about being taught about racism and sexism, not reading and writing. I think was the quote, and that's not the case. It's just not the case. We were a regular comprehensive school.
We're just seeing pictures as we speak to you, Martin, of the moment that she became Prime Minister earlier at Balmoral when she was invited by the Queen to form that new administration. Now, with your Guardian hat on, what do you think America will make of her? Clearly, they'll have seen her as Foreign Secretary, but what sort of relationship do you think she'll have with President Biden?
I'm trying to wonder what a Guardian hat would look like in a sort of Trump-esque way.
Paper hat, maybe? I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Recyclable. I think, Biden and Johnson were not a good match. Biden said a few things about Johnson before Biden was elected. He compared him to Mr. Trump. Liz Truss and Biden, I don't know. I think Liz Truss and Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, seem to have worked together pretty smoothly as Foreign Secretary. There's been a few things that have gone right there on Ukraine and so on. Biden is a traditional guy. He's for the traditional special relationship. He's for the traditional close relationship, which I'm pretty sure Liz Truss will be. I'm not an expert in British foreign policy, but given her view of in her view, golden years of Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, I would assume she wants to be close and to restart the special relationship, or if not restart, reboot, whatever you want to call it. I would think it's a natural thing that she'll be here quite soon in Washington to talk to Biden and be seen with Biden at the White House. So I guess we'll see from there.
Well, Martin, thank you very much indeed for bringing us that view from New York as a Roundhay alumni. Thank you very much indeed for your time.
We have still got our political reporter, Catherine Foster, with us in the studio. So a little bit of insight, a bit of colour into Liz Truss's background there. We know she's 47. We know she went to Oxbridge. But tell us about her schooling.
Yes, she is actually different. She's only the third Prime Minister in our history who went to a non-selective state comprehensive. So, sure, she went to Oxford, she did PPE, like a list of, oh my goodness, so many Prime Ministers, so many people who
Politics, philosophy and economics.
Government, politics, philosophy and economics. Yes, but she came from a normal comprehensive school and she came from a left-wing background, now possibly quite an affluent, comfortable middle-class background. Certainly, when she sort of tried to imply that she grew up in a red wall seat, that's not really going to cut it because, I mean, I'm from Harrogate, it's not far from Leeds. Roundhay is a very...
It's also quite posh.
Also quite posh.
It's really posh.
Well, it was Lib Dem, it's Tory at the moment.
Betty's tea room, I seem to remember.
I also went to a non-selective state conf, I would like to say, but I'm not Prime Minister.
I went to Bradford. No one says that's posh.
No.
I grew up in Bradford.
But, you know, she It is an amazing achievement, isn't it? She is the third female Prime Minister. She has done this from a normal school. But certainly, Roundhay's not a sort of red wall area. Of course, there's pockets of deprivation, but she certainly has ruffled feathers. And it was reported at the weekend that despite the fact she said, kids didn't have the opportunity, that she was actually given extra tuition in economics and maths by the school to help to get her into Oxford, which is above and beyond what you would normally expect from a state school. So,
the third non-selective school-educated Prime Minister, but I think it's the 29th Prime Minister we've had who went to Oxbridge. So she is in the firm tradition in one respect.
In one respect. But yeah, she didn't come from a posh private education. And so let's hope that she will be mindful of social mobility and class. Talk a lot about diversity in terms of ethnic mix. Certainly, we're going to have a cabinet, and indeed Boris Johnson's cabinet was very diverse too.
And an interesting
socially
point,
and in terms
just
of
to flag up, because Johnson was always criticised about the lack of being able to concentrate on the detail and the nuts and bolts of governing. She's actually very different. She's quite a good administrator from what we know of her cabinet positions.
Yeah, she does the work, and she's been in cabinet for, longer.
8 years.
Yeah.
I think even more than that, longer than I think anybody else, under 3 different prime ministers. So she obviously has been able to do the jobs and work with people over a long period of time. But I think it's fair to say she has certainly been underestimated because she was treated as lightweight, etc. But here she is as prime minister, so...
Yeah,
certainly
top
is.
marks from Roundhay. Yeah, indeed. Catherine, thanks very much indeed.
More to come in the next hour, but first it's time for a break and your weather.
Hello, I'm Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. Showers again today. In fact, for the rest of this week, it'll be a similar headline. Heavy showers, thunderstorms in places, but it won't rain all day. Between the showers, there will be some sunshine. Look at this large area of low pressure dominating and not moving anywhere. Just around it, bands of showers will continue to track their way across the UK. So the showers will be in bands. There will be slots where you could be dry for several hours. Probably not too many showers at all today across parts of East Anglia, and we'll see some decent spells of sunshine over the Midlands and northwest England. But elsewhere, the showers will come and go. Some heavy downpours likely. As I said, the risk of thunderstorms as well may even cause some local problems. Certainly some pretty grim conditions on the roads. But when the sun's out, it's still pretty warm with temperatures in the low 20s. Through this evening, we'll continue with this area of low pressure to throw bands of showers across the country. Another one moving northwards overnight. Again, heavy downpours are possible. So again, expect a fair amount of spray and surface water on the roads tomorrow morning. Again, a pretty warm night as well. 15, 16 maybe in some towns and cities. Really quite warm and humid air sitting across the country, which will again allow more heavy showers to come tomorrow. Again, many places will start dry and fine with sunny spells away from those bands of showers, and then the showers just develop pretty widely by late morning. Maybe not too many across southernmost parts of England, some sunshine here, and temperatures in the sunny spells, high teens or low 20s, so perhaps a little cooler than today. Again, heavy showers could cause some issues, certainly through Wednesday evening's rush hour. Again, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Thunderstorms are likely in a few spots. Perhaps a hint of a change with the low pressure moving in, the winds easing a touch, but that means slow moving heavy showers on Thursday and Friday. And it does look a little drier for most of us by Saturday.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
for helping our great nation.
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland. On TV.
on radio and online.
We're proud to be
The People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Hello and a very warm welcome to this latest hour of GB Newsday with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria De Piero. Liz Truss has officially become our Prime Minister after meeting the Queen at Balmoral earlier today. We'll be heading to Westminster for the latest in just a moment. But before that, your latest news.
Good afternoon. It's just 1 minute past 2. I'm Rosie Wright, keeping you up to date on GB News. Liz Truss is now the country's new Prime Minister. She had an audience with the Queen at Balmoral Castle and was invited to form a new government. Well, this afternoon, she's expected to announce an emergency support package to deal with the energy crisis when she addresses the nation for the first time from Downing Street. She's also due to name her new cabinet. We'll bring you that speech live. Well, the Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner, says the Conservatives have failed to provide a sound solution on energy.
Liz Truss' plan seems to be to adopt Labour's position of freezing the energy cap at the moment so people are not paying more, but to put that burden back onto the taxpayers and to increase debt. What Labour have said is that we should have a windfall tax on gas and oil companies that pays for this freeze, but we need a longer term solution to look at renewables, to retrofit homes, to make sure that our energy is self-sufficient and that our homes are as energy efficient as they possibly can be. There's been no plan from the Conservatives.
Well, earlier, Buckingham Palace confirmed that Boris Johnson had tendered his resignation, which Her Majesty was graciously pleased to accept. Mr Johnson and his wife Carrie spent almost 40 minutes with the monarch before leaving Balmoral. Earlier, outside Number 10, in his speech, he promised his fervent support to his successor, saying Liz Truss and her new cabinet will do everything they can to support families through the energy crisis.
I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support. I'll tell you why. This is a tough time for the economy. This is a tough time for families up and down the country. We can and we will get through it and we will come out stronger the other side. But I say to my fellow Conservatives, it's time for politics to be over, folks. It's time for us all to get behind Liz Truss and her team and her programme and deliver for the people of this country.
In some other news now. A man's died after being shot by police in South London. Lambeth Palace says a suspect vehicle was being chased by officers and deliberately crashed into a car, forcing it to stop in Streatham Hill on Monday night. A police firearm was discharged and a man, thought to be in his 20s, was injured. The Met Police has referred itself for an investigation into the incident. The father of Olivia Pratt-Corbell, who was shot in Liverpool, says her death cannot be in vain. The 9-year-old was killed by a gunman who chased his intended target into her home last month. John Francis Pratt is appealing for anyone with information to come forward. Detectives have been granted a 36-hour extension to question 3 men over her death. A official sources have told GB News that Albanian criminal gangs are risking a major tragedy by pushing small boats into the English Channel in poor weather. Despite deteriorating conditions, Ministry of Defence figures show 188 people crossed into UK waters yesterday, and today at least 3 small boats were intercepted. So far this year, more than 27,500 people have made the journey across the Channel. A new £370 million HS2 station is set to bring around 1,000 jobs to the West Midlands. The Mayor, Andy Street, says it will play a critical role in the area's economic recovery. Construction for the Birmingham Interchange Station, which will service the NEC, the city's airport and Solihull, has already begun, but it won't open until 2026. Speaking to GB News, Mr Street said the new jobs will be given to locals.
1,000 jobs, critical, and we will be making sure that they are given to local people. Indeed, we'll be working with the contractors, as we already are, with Balfour Beatty, for example, to train local people, unemployed people, specifically for jobs in HS2. So we've got a great record on that, and I'm sure we'll do the same with Lango Rourke.
Tens of thousands of firefighters and control room staff are going to be balloted for industrial action. The Fire Brigades Union says it follows a 2% pay offer made in June, which hasn't been increased despite soaring inflation. The FBU claims that represents a real terms pay cut. The vote is expected to be held next month. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are in Germany to promote the Invictus Games. The red carpet was rolled out as Prince Harry and Meghan arrived for a reception in Dusseldorf to mark 1 year until the event gets underway. Prince Harry founded the Games to help aid the rehabilitation of military personnel and veterans, giving them the challenge of competing in sporting events similar to the Paralympics. This is GB News. I'll bring you more as it happens.
Rosie, thanks very much indeed, and welcome back to GB Newsday, where, of course, it is now official. Liz Truss is our new Prime Minister. Already reaction, perhaps not quite the one that she would have been hoping for. We're being told by Press Association that senior Tory Sir Bernard Jenkin has urged her to level with the British people about the, quote, utterly dire situation that the country faces in her first speech as Prime Minister. So,
but I think you will think that's helpful because
yes.
You need to be straight. And I think what Sir Bernard Grandee of the Tory party is calling for is to level with the public about the difficulties that we face. But they won't just want to know about the difficulties, they will want to know about the solutions.
It's not a happy in tray, indeed.
Liz Truss met the Queen at Balmoral Castle early this afternoon, shortly after Boris Johnson tendered his resignation.
Well, as we've just been discussing, it's not an enviable in tray by any means waiting for her. She heads back to Downing Street, probably with a speech at about 4 o'clock, we understood. It's the war in Ukraine, the cost of living crisis, and, of course, the energy problems in particular.
Our correspondent, Ellie Costello, looks back on the day's events so far.
After a 7-week leadership contest, the moment had come for Boris Johnson to resign as Prime Minister. But not before one final performance of defiance outside Number 10.
This is it, folks. The baton will be handed over in what has unexpectedly turned out to be a relay race. They changed the rules halfway through, but never mind that now.
He hinted that he hopes for a return to Number 10 by comparing himself to Cincinnatus, the Roman statesman best remembered for being called out of retirement to lead the people again.
Like Cincinnatus, I am returning to my plough, and I will be offering this government nothing but the most fervent support.
Boris Johnson said he would back Liz Truss and urge the Conservative Party to unite, comparing them to the age-old fight between cats and dogs, using his dog Dylan and Downing Street cat Larry as examples.
And I know that Liz Truss and this compassionate Conservative government will do everything we can to get people through this crisis, and this country will endure it, and we will win. If Dylan and Larry can put behind them their occasional difficulties, then so can the Conservative Party.
After the speech, some of the Prime Minister's most loyal allies shared hugs and souvenir snaps. Mr Johnson and his wife Carrie then boarded a plane from RAF Northolt in West London to Balmoral. And it was there in Her Majesty's Green Drawing Room where Boris Johnson met Her Majesty to offer his formal resignation. Next, it was the turn of the new leader of the Conservative Party and Prime Minister-elect Liz Truss, who boarded a plane to Scotland. After landing, she was driven to Balmoral for her audience with the Queen, where Her Majesty officially asked her to form a government. It's not the first time Liz Truss has met Her Majesty, but a private audience will be a unique experience for her. Today, Liz Truss becomes the 15th Prime Minister to serve the Queen. The next task is to start naming her cabinet, with Home Secretary Priti Patel and Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries already resigning. Liz Truss will also give the big speech of the day, her first addressing the nation as Prime Minister. Ellie Costello, GB News.
Let's now cross over to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, who is live in Downing Street before it all kicks off. All the action will kick off around 4. That's right, isn't it, Darren? What can we expect?
Yeah, indeed. You're right in saying that Liz Truss, the new Prime Minister, Britain's 56th Prime Minister, is expected, I think, in the air any moment now to head back here to London. She's going to arrive in Downing Street, we think, around 4 p.m, go inside, meet some of the new staff, of course, who will be serving her as Prime Minister, and then she's going to address us, all of us, the nation, at around 4:15, we reckon. It's going to be a really, really interesting speech, this, isn't it? We heard yesterday from her, but that was very much in the wake of her becoming Conservative leader. Today, I think this is a really significant moment for her, as it is indeed for any Prime Minister, marking out a narrative of where they see their premiership going, and there is no doubt that Liz Truss is facing a pretty difficult task in the weeks, months and years to come. Clearly there's an awful lot of expectation and speculation around what's going to happen with energy prices this autumn and winter. We're expecting to hear details of that later on this week. But in the end, what is the wider narrative of what Liz Truss is trying to do? And we got a hint of it yesterday when she said that she would serve essentially as a Conservative leader at the head of a Conservative government. And I do think, actually, in many ways, in contrast to Theresa May and Boris Johnson, her two previous predecessors, that actually she will be a more ideological Prime Minister, and that in the end, actually, she will be a much more Conservative Prime Minister, maybe not reaching the same parts of the country that those two politicians did, but someone who literally ran on a mandate of cutting taxes of a smaller state. The big question, though, is even if that is the narrative she sets out here in a couple of hours' time, will she have the headroom to do so? Because I come back to this fundamental point, given where the economy is, given the desperate need for some people to get help, it seems almost certain that one of the first significant policy announcements Liz Truss, a Conservative leader who talks about a small state, will do, will be an incredible state intervention into the energy markets to try and keep prices controlled this autumn and winter.
The piggy bank, if you like, the headroom that was in the economy is some 30 billion, they're estimated. Well, the Office of Budget Responsibility is saying that's obviously pretty much evaporated now. But interesting to underline the difficulty she's got with this quote from Bernard Jenkins in the last few minutes, urging her to level with the British people about the utterly dire situation the country faces in that first speech.
Yeah, and I think she will, to a degree. Now, she doesn't want to get into a situation, and she attacked it, and of course, the Governor of the Bank of England, Mark, for kind of doing down the British economy a little bit earlier on this summer when he talked about a protracted recession starting at the end of this year and lasting well into next. So I don't think she's going to be, to quote the former Prime Minister, a doomster, as Boris Johnson would call her. But I think there is going to have to be a recognition of the fact that, yes, the economy is heading for troubled times, that clearly there will be help with energy prices, that the migration crisis is not sorted out in the English Channel by quite some way, and that the NHS is facing, again, a very, very difficult winter post-pandemic. There will have to be a recognition of that. The cold, hard reality of politics is going to hit Liz Truss pretty quickly. But in the end, also, she's going to have to talk about uniting this country, about getting the task done. As we heard again from her yesterday, she wants to be a Prime Minister that's seen to deliver, repeating that word. Again, almost harping back to Tony Blair, talking about we will deliver 3 times. But her first task, actually, will be to appoint her cabinet, and we're expecting that to happen pretty quickly this evening. We kind of know who the lead candidates are for some of the big top posts. Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor, Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, James Cleverly in the Foreign Office, taking over from her. Some of the other jobs, though, are proving a bit more difficult to fill. We believe that the Northern Ireland Secretary post, never the most popular, has been offered 2 or 3 times to different politicians, thus far been turned down. But we do expect that to happen, and there could well be a cabinet meeting as early as tomorrow morning ahead of PMQs. This is not the end of a busy period of politics, Mark. This really is, I genuinely mean this, only the beginning.
And Ian Duncan-Smith, the former Conservative Party leader who backed Liz Truss, he's turned down a cabinet position, hasn't he?
Yeah, he has indeed. We believe he wanted a departmental role in the cabinet. That wasn't offered. We believe it was leader of the House of Commons instead. So he's decided to stay on the backbenches, if you like. There is much speculation about where other people may well end up. Nadine Dorries, of course, the Culture Secretary, has handed in her resignation. Who is going to get her post? Suggestions it could be Kemi Badenoch, of course, ran as a leadership contender earlier on in the summer. Is Penny Mordaunt going to be in this cabinet? And the other big question is, how far is Liz Truss going to reach out into the depths of the Conservative Party, into the different angles of that broad church, to Rishi Sunak supporters, to Boris Johnson supporters, to people who, frankly, were not on her side over the last couple of months? Is she prepared to do that, or does she want primarily a cabinet made up of loyalists that she feels she can trust? And again, that's going to be a real test for her, because there are many within the party feeling that she does need to reach out to different parts of the Conservative Party if she genuinely wants to try and unite a pretty fractious party. But at the same time, if you've got people inside your ranks, inside the cabinet, disagreeing with major policy issues, that again just throws up obstacles later on down the line. So none of this is easy for Liz Truss. She knows that, of course. She knows she's taking on one of the most difficult in-trays that any government has faced since 1979. But this also will be an historic moment, of course. You know, this is the Queen's 15th Prime Minister. It's the 4th Prime Minister we've seen in 6 years. Glory. But it is also Britain's 3rd female Prime Minister, and she will, of course, take up residence inside Number 10 in that rather infamous flat now, it must be said. I don't know what she's going to do about the furniture, but she will take up residence with her family as she embarks on what is going to be an incredibly turbulent time for Britain, an incredibly turbulent time for British politics.
And ahead of any official cabinet announcement, Darren, of course, Kwasi Kwarteng widely tipped as being the incumbent for number 11 next door. What are we likely to see in terms of that working relationship? Because some have said it could hark back to the George Osborne, David Cameron days, when the two were very much more in sync than we've seen recently.
Yeah, I think that's almost certainly going to be the case. They are close political allies. They're clearly on the same page. We heard from Kwasi Kwarteng, didn't we, just a couple of days ago, suggesting the government is going to do an awful lot more on energy prices, and that will be done through borrowing. You know, he would not be saying that without the authority of Liz Truss. So I suspect we will see a pretty good working relationship between number 10 and number 11, at least to begin with, though, you know, these relationships tend to tear and fracture a little bit, don't they, as the politics gets difficult. The really interesting thing is what's going to happen with that policy announcement on Thursday, we think on Thursday, with energy prices. It looks like there is going to be a freeze on the cap, if you like.
We're just seeing pictures of Boris Johnson's plane landing back at RAF Northolt. We saw it leaving Aberdeen a little earlier. This is one of the RAF's executive jet fleet, a Dassault Falcon 900 LX, we're being told. And we believe that Carrie, his wife, is on board as well. But back at what is an operational RAF base, still very tight security. The question mark is now, of course, where he goes and what he does when he steps off that plane.
And of course, when he started his journey this morning, he started as Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Now he is the honourable member for Uxbridge and South Ruislip. I think I've remembered that correctly. So we have our new UK Prime Minister, Liz Truss. She has been appointed.
Now this is back at Aberdeen, right?
And her plane is still static. Is that right?
Yeah, this is Aberdeen, where the second jet is waiting for Liz Truss. So that's the motorcade that's come from Balmoral, the security details in those Range Rovers, and they'll probably park up the other side, so we won't see her walking up those steps. But this should give her time. I think they're running about 15 minutes late to get back to Downing Street for what was scheduled to be a 4 o'clock speech at the lectern outside, but clearly, as we can see from the weather, it may well delay things. Quite low cloud, quite thick cloud. But clearly, this is a very sort of orchestrated event. And Darren, any indications if that dais will be outside in Downing Street, given what the weather's doing there?
Well, looking at the weather where I am, it's pretty overcast, but it's still dry. I'm not a weatherman, Mark, but I've been following the Met Office weather forecast on GBNews quite a lot today, and I think it might hold off, actually. It's incredibly difficult to tell, because I think these are kind of slightly random showers that even the most accurate of weather people struggle to tell where and when precisely. But I think at the moment, they seem pretty confident it will happen in the streets. I mean, it would really take away from the occasion if it didn't so. So I think it's about an hour flight, isn't it, from Aberdeen, as you say, running a little behind schedule. I think two interesting things. The interesting thing about Boris Johnson, who is back in London now, what is he going to do? Alluding this morning that he is going to, on the whole, take a back line and all of this. The party needed to unite behind Liz Truss, though alluding to that he might at some stage come back. But I suspect we will not hear from Boris Johnson. He will not disappear in the sense that he will do lots of speaking engagements and quite a lot of money, and may well have a newspaper column before too long. And he's going to, of course, become a private citizen again tomorrow's screen. He'll keep some of the security detail, but I believe he's got a house for the next 6 months to live in while he tries to find somewhere more permanent to live. So Liz Truss getting on that plane, flying back to London. He's expected here, and at around 4 o'clock, we're hoping to hear from the new Prime Minister in a first speech at 4:15. Let me just very, very quickly just finish on that energy price stuff, just because it's really important about the detail, and that is how it's going to be paid for. So it looks like almost definitely now we're going to see some type of freeze on the price cap. The question is it going to come from borrowing, simply the government ratcheting up the bill even more, and it could be an awful lot of money, over 100 billion, more than furlough, or is it going to be spread out over bills in the long-term future, over the next 10 to 20 years? It looks like, I'm only saying it looks like at the moment, that it could be done through borrowing, which is a pretty risky strategy given where our government debt is, given where the mood within the Conservative Party is about borrowing. But that looks like where we may well end up in regards to that energy price freeze cap. We're expecting details of that, as I say, on Thursday.
And Darren, party politics resumes tomorrow. It's her first Prime Minister's Question Time. I think you're absolutely right about the energy price cap, in the sense that there is a consensus that energy prices need to be frozen, but I think the political divide moves to who is going to pay for it and who is going to win that battle, whether it should be the taxpayer over a length of time or the energy companies, and whether Labour's sums add up.
Indeed, but, you know, the Labour Party would turn around, Gloria, and say the people who should be paying for all of this is, of course, those energy companies that are making an awful lot of money, unexpected profit, it must be said, because of the really high price of gas and oil at the moment. Now, clearly critics of that would point out that that could stifle investment. It's not good to have retrospective taxes put in place, but the Labour Party would argue actually they should be picking up more of the bill, at least, rather than the general taxpayer. But yes, I think Labour tomorrow, and again, this is why politics is a pretty brutal, fast-moving game. I mean, she will have literally just got her feet under the table, Liz Truss, and then face one of the most daunting prospects that any Prime Minister faces every single week, which is the House of Commons at 12 noon on a Wednesday for PMQs. But yes, I think Labour will claim a victory in all of this, and maybe rightly so, in that they had suggested this freeze on an energy cap, last month. And Keir Starmer may well point to the fact that, yet again, the Conservative Party are having to copy some of their ideas, though it is a policy that has now been widely implemented, it must be said, across much of Europe, given the fact that most Western European countries have found themselves in exactly the same position with extortionate energy prices this autumn and winter, given that war in Ukraine. But that is only one of a whole range of problems and obstacles facing Liz Truss in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks. And that's why I think, actually, these couple of weeks leading up to party conference will be absolutely crucial. for her premiership. I mean, they really could set the entire tone for the next 2 years. And the reason I say that is because big announcements like that one on energy really need to land well. They need to do her some good pretty early on, because she's got no honeymoon period here. People have been asking for some form of policy for months now. She needs to get these things right pretty early on, or I think it could dent her popularity so much that it might put her on the back foot for quite a long period of time. That could, in theory, because it's not that long to an election, put her essentially in a politically difficult situation. It is not easy taking over from another Prime Minister halfway through a term when you have not got your own mandate, particularly when your party is 10, 12 points behind in most opinion polls.
And we're going to stay with these pictures of the jet on the ground at Aberdeen, about to take off for RAF Northolt. And we assume there's not going to be much time for tea and cake on board. She will be really having to catch up with what we assume will be intelligence and security briefings. Clearly, as Foreign Secretary, she will be shown various details of sensitive topics, but not as much as a Prime Minister is.
Yeah, indeed, and actually one of the first acts that will happen when she finishes making that speech is that Liz Truss will go inside Downing Street. She will go directly to the Cabinet room at the back of the building. She will be sat down by Cabinet Secretary, and she will be told some pretty significant stuff. First of all, she'll have to agree for us to blow up half the world if we get attacked, i.e. to prime those nuclear weapons. Which is a massive call for anyone to make, but that will be one of the key decisions that she will make, the first decision she will make. But then you're right, she'll be sat down and she'll be talked through a lot of security briefing. And yes, as Foreign Secretary, she will have seen and know quite a lot of this already. But I think as Gus O'Donnell, the former Cabinet Secretary, put it on the radio the other day, being a senior minister, whether it's Defence Secretary or Foreign Secretary, you're kind of... You've got about an 8 out of 10 in terms of an overall view of what's happening in the country, particularly when it comes to security. But the Prime Minister obviously is a 10 out of 10 bird's eye view. And most Prime Ministers, when they've spoken about this in the past, have said it is pretty sobering, these security briefings. And it is a reminder of not just the incredible honour that it is to be Prime Minister and to serve the British public, and I'm sure Liz Truss will reflect that in the speech, but also what a responsibility it is too. You know, Britain is a nuclear nation. We've got nuclear weapons. We're the fourth, I think, largest defence spender and country in terms of armed forces in the world. And this at a time when there is war on our continent in Europe with that invasion by Russia of Ukraine.
Darren, for the moment in Downing Street, we'll let you gaze skywards to see what the clouds are doing ahead of that expected speech. Well, probably a bit later than 4 o'clock now, because we're still waiting for the jet to take off here from Aberdeen. You can see quite thick cloud and, well, looks a bit of mist and fog as well before that jet heads back to RAF Northolt.
Catherine Foster, our political reporter, is still with us in the studio. So Liz Truss married 2 teenage children, and they will be moving into Downing Street. What sort of environment is it for a family?
It's a very strange world, isn't it, Downing Street? It's their home and it's also an office. It's a network of lots of different interconnected rooms, people coming and going. And the Downing Street flat itself, not particularly big, obviously been redecorated. I think it's very tough for children. And there's been a lot of children recently, over the last 20 years or so, in Downing Street, haven't there? All Tony Blair's brood, then Gordon Brown, his 2 boys, Boris Johnson, you know, 2 children. But especially for teenagers, because teenagers find parents massively embarrassing, don't they? I can imagine.
And she's going to have so little time, because when she gets... When that plane lands, when that plane leaves Aberdeen Airport and returns to London, it is just bam, 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 isn't it? Speech outside number 10, assemble cabinet meeting in the morning, PMQs tomorrow, energy freeze price freeze on Thursday, or so we expect. Who would want that job?
You would wonder, wouldn't you? And I think, you know, we remember David Cameron and he was chillaxing or whatever. Though we're in such a different world now, aren't we? It's going to be very, very different. And I hope she's got a bit of downtime over the summer, here and there between the hustings, because I don't think it's going to
that Range Rover we've just seen there, that's Boris Johnson and Carrie Johnson, we understand, just leaving RAF Northolt. There will be, of course, a security car as well, because clearly he's no longer Prime Minister, but still an MP and still with the security detail.
Well, our former Prime Ministers do get...
Indeed,
MPs don't get any
protection.
security, but former Prime Ministers do get...
no outriders as such, but I think obviously there's a police vehicle with him as well. We were reflecting on the inbox. Liam is back with us in the studio, our economics editor, because Thursday we're expecting the unveiling, but we hope that they've got it all sorted by now and they've done their number crunching, and they're big numbers too.
They are, and it's really easy to lose track. You know, we've all been talking about energy price caps for months here on GBNews. So let's just take 5 and have a look at some of the numbers. If we can bring up the Ofgem energy price cap graphic now. Back in October 2021, Mark, the Ofgem energy price cap was set at £1,277. Then in April 2022, it went to £1,970. That's a huge increase. But hang about, from October, we now know, it was announced a couple of weeks ago, it's going to be over £3,500. That's a threefold increase in household energy bills in a year. And this cap only helps households. Firms, they're facing even higher increases in wholesale gas prices, which is used to generate electricity, 4, 5, sometimes even tenfold. So what might a Truss energy support package look like? And I agree with you, Gloria, I think it is going to be coming on Thursday. Rishi Sunak, when he was Chancellor, already announced a £400 grant for all households across the piece. That may be controversial because even if you're well off, you get that. There's an additional £650. These grants are now coming through for households which qualify for certain qualifying benefits. Not all benefits, but certain qualifying benefits. So that's quite chunky. That's over £1,000. But if your average bill's £3,500, it doesn't really touch the sides. So what we're probably going to see now is some kind of energy price freeze, but the freeze will be at the old cap, not the new cap coming in. So all this worry we've had about this new energy price cap in October coming in, it might be completely irrelevant. It makes you wonder why they didn't announce... Well, they didn't announce this a month ago because they were in the middle of a...
Zombie government.
A Tory leadership contest, weren't they? And crucially, I think, for a lot of GB News viewers, a lot of senior members of the government incoming have at least hinted that there will be help for both households and firms. It's an enormous amount of money. We can't just, wipe away wholesale energy prices. If the energy companies are going to sell us energy at these cheaper prices, the government's going to have to subsidise it in some way, maybe by helping the energy companies to take loans on with the government standing behind them. We're looking at 70 to 100 billion pounds.
It's like a wartime debt, isn't it?
Which is more than the cost of furlough. And if you think about it, we're already set to borrow 100 billion pounds this year. So we're talking about doubling government borrowing in a single year with a single policy.
Liam, the sort of row is who's going to pay for it and how is it going to be paid, isn't it? Are Labour onto something? Can they make capital by saying, no, it shouldn't be down to the taxpayer who will have to pay it, and our children and children's children, etc., etc. It should be the oil and the gas companies who are raking in these profits, not because they've done any wonderful work, just sort of...
just the wholesale
just
price.
because of the price. But does it make economic sense, Labour's argument? It certainly, I think, makes political sense.
Well, even Labour have been talking about windfall taxes that just about scrape into the double-digit billions. The government's windfall tax has been around 5 billion, Labour's is around 10 billion. Even that isn't really going to make a huge dent in a £100 billion bill. I think you can push the what we call the upstream energy companies more, the ones that actually get the stuff out the ground, the North Sea and elsewhere, but they will push back because these companies can make money anywhere in the world. They won't respond to government pleas to increase North Sea production. They'll say, no, why should we? It's a very hard-nosed business. I think there is an appetite among senior oil executives to accept that some kind of windfall tax is needed. We may have reached the limit of that, even with the government's proposals, let alone Labour's proposals. The real issue is, does this fall on energy bill payers themselves, so the rich then pay more, or does it fall on general taxation? Of course, the rich pay more then anyway, but the less well-off pay a lot less. A lot of our poorest households don't pay tax. So if it does fall on general taxation that will probably be seen as the most progressive thing. But it's not a good look for a Prime Minister that said she wants to introduce tax cuts.
Liam, we're just going to break in because you can see the jets on the move there at Aberdeen. Just to remind you, this is Liz Truss on board with her husband as well, having gone to Balmoral. And this jet will be heading back to RAF Northolt a little later than perhaps they were originally intending. So we may well see that speech at 4 o'clock in Downing Street being moved back a little bit. You can see how bad the weather's there, quite a lot of drizzle and low cloud. So we were expecting this pushback from the stand and take over about 2 o'clock, so it's about half an hour late. But clearly there'll be a lot going on inside the aircraft, as well as Darren was indicating to us. She'll be getting security and intelligence briefings.
And she'll be thinking very hard about what she's going to say. These will be the first words when she does land, and she is preparing to take off. We're going to watch that plane take off as she comes back to Downing Street, and when we will hear her first address to the nation, to all of us as our new Prime Minister. And those things become historic. One always sort of, particularly Thatcher, actually. In fact, you and I were chatting about which words we could remember, and also Catherine too. And Catherine was saying that she could remember Theresa May's words about the just about managing.
Catherine, do we know, has she got a speechwriter yet, or who's likely to be?
Oh, you cynic!
The
she's
power
doing it. She's writing it all herself.
Of course she is. That's what she's doing right this moment. She's got a notebook out on a biro and she's scribbling away.
I can't tell you. I'm afraid there's so much in flux at the moment. But
well, it's interesting because
sure
David Mellor's been making the point. She needs to work on this presentational aspect, as of course Margaret Thatcher did with Tim Bell from the PR company. You know, you lower the voice, slow the voice down.
I think
Margaret Thatcher's voice changed very dramatically, didn't it?
Changed. I think actually that would be terrible PR. I mean, you can contest this if you like, but I think what people really want is they want some authenticity, don't they? And I think any hint that somebody had gone through speech training,
we're back to the round A comprehensive go again.
but I think people would think, oh gosh, I can't believe you know she's got time to do that, rather than focus on just getting on with the job.
Yeah, I think people will forgive her for the fact that she's not Boris Johnson. She's not. She's not a show person. Who is? You know, he is unique, but she maybe has other strengths. I think at the end of the day, what will really matter is what she does for people, and people worrying about how to pay their bills now. Everything else, I think, is less, not unimportant, but less critical.
Yeah. And the nation will literally breathe a sigh of relief. We've all been so anxious, and of course, if you're from a poorer household, even in an average household, you've been extremely anxious because you cannot make the numbers add up. Yeah. You cannot work out how you can put the heating on as the seasons change. And there's going to be a huge sigh of relief when, if we expect, she speaks on Thursday to announce how she's going to freeze energy prices, and I think that's going to. The Tories aren't in a great pole position at the moment, but I think that's an instant bounce.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading yesterday that you need to be earning 64,000 not to be going into fuel stress, fuel poverty, as they call it, when the cap went to 3,500, let alone if it was to go to 6 or 7. So I think it will be a huge relief, at least. But of course, how it will be paid for, that's another matter entirely.
I was at home with my mum in Bradford at the weekend. I hope she doesn't mind, but I was looking at her forecast. Now, she is a pensioner on pension credit, so that would bring you about £12,000 a year. And I was looking at the forecast from our energy company, and that was £7,000 estimated gas and electricity. Now, of course, pensioners, they spend longer at home because they're not going out to work, they're in the house. So, in particular, those sorts of households, they're going to have to be looked after. I suppose the argument you could have
I think we've got the jet on the move.
Oh, she's on the move.
Yeah, so this, just to remind you, is Liz Truss on board this RAF executive jet, going to head back to RAF Northolt. Aberdeen here, of course, is a commercial airport, even though it's used by the royal family when they head up to Aberdeen. You can see lots of the helicopters there as well, used on the North Sea oil industry, what's left of it. But we are looking at perhaps a delay in terms of her appearance at Downing Street for that speech. We were expecting it at 4. It'll probably be slightly later because it's still going to be a bit of a drive from RAF Northolt out in Middlesex to get back to number 10. But this is her first act as Prime Minister, to head back to Downing Street to address the nation with that speech at 4 o'clock. Catherine, what do you expect it will be? Reassurance, trying to regain the nation's confidence?
I would expect so. I mean, she wants to paint a positive vision. As Bernard Jenkins was saying, it's obviously very difficult because the outlook is pretty bleak at the moment. So to strike a balance between saying, I'm going to do my best, be reassuring, and calm people's nerves, I think, first and foremost, and also to try to say, we're going to move forward, we're going to get through this together.
OK, it's rolling. So this is the takeoff with a repeat of what we saw a little earlier with Boris Johnson heading back to London on board this Dassault Falcon executive jet. It is part of the RAF fleet, and Boris Johnson back in London a little earlier. Now it's Liz Truss and her husband too, Hugh O'Leary, on board.
Our 56th Prime Minister on her way
into the clouds already. You can see how low the cloud is there, so that's going to be another bumpy flight,
on her way to Downing Street to address all of us. And that's when we will really get a sense of her priorities, who she is. She will have been thinking about those words for quite some time.
Oh, yes.
I imagine, because you know the first words that you say to the nation, first impressions matter.
Yes, and absolutely. And we were talking about this earlier, weren't we? I remember Theresa May stood on the steps of Downing Street, they're just about managing. She was saying the big companies, people feel that the system's not working for them. Big companies were coming after your profits. Lots of people said she's just parked her tanks on Labour's lawn. And that first impression is really key. It'll be fascinating to see how she angles this, because, of course, she's been bidding to be Conservative Prime Minister to 172,000 membership, as we found, who are very keen on small state, very keen on tax cuts.
Yeah.
Is that where the public are? The public want help. We have a, economic crisis at the moment. So whether she will go down that free market, small state route, whether she'll mention that, she says, she wants to govern in a conservative way, in a way that we haven't perhaps heard for quite a long time. How much we'll hear of that this afternoon. It'll be really interesting
And
to
do
see.
you suspect that word deliver will appear? We saw, of course, when she had the speech after the successful vote, deliver, aping sort of Tony Blair's education.
Yeah.
I mean, that clearly is the message she's been told to try and get through to the public.
Yeah, and right through the leadership campaign, hasn't she? Yeah. She said, I'm someone who gets things done.
Yes.
I deliver. You can. So she's like, there's a job to do here. I can deliver. I've proved that I can. Put me in charge. So, yeah, let's see how many times it gets said, if at all.
Catherine, thanks for now. Among the new Prime Minister's extensive to-do list is how to continue levelling up. Remember that.
Yeah.
And improve Britain's infrastructure. Earlier, I spoke to Andy Street, the Conservative Mayor for the West Midlands, and asked him what he'd like to hear from Liz Truss as she enters Downing Street.
I think two things, Gloria, stand out. The first, an internal piece, would be about inclusivity, bringing all of the party together, and then ultimately, of course, to try to bring the country together, because we've had a very divided time. And then the second word I want to hear time and time again is levelling up. I know we've got an immediate crisis over energy costs. I wanted to deal with that, but I want to make absolutely certain that the momentum around levelling up is right at the top of her agenda.
And we haven't heard so much about levelling up during this contest. It's certainly not been the top thing that we've heard about. The thing that Boris Johnson talked about over and over again, whether it happened, we can debate. But the phrase, we don't hear it as often anymore. Are you a bit worried about that?
You're accurate. It hasn't been spoken as much in the campaign, but I'm actually not worried, because I've got very firm commitments from Liz Truss. I've met her at the Commonwealth Games, had a good debate about it. We've had email, letter exchanges, and I am certain that she is utterly committed to maintaining the government's priority around levelling up. So I'm expecting a new Secretary of State to be appointed, and some of the key things, whether it be HS2, whether it be investment zones. She's talked about big infrastructure projects, economic projects for the West Midlands. So I'm very confident they will go ahead.
And you mentioned that you also wanted her to talk about inclusivity of the country, of course, but also of the party. Now, no one knows for sure who will be in her cabinet, but there seems to be a lot of briefing going on. It seems pretty informed. The top jobs seem very, very likely to go to Liz Truss supporters. So either all the talents in the party just happen to vote for Liz Truss, or she is just appointing allies.
So I'm expecting that some who were not necessarily with her right from the start, but maybe came on board later on in the campaign, and some who were not on board will still have important jobs in cabinet. So we hear of Kemi Badenoch, we hear of Tom Tugendhat, man who's got a lot of my values there. So I am very confident that there will be within the cabinet voices who will make sure this genuinely represents the whole of the Conservative Party. And that would be a very important first step for the Prime Minister to demonstrate that bringing together ability.
What will you miss most about Boris Johnson?
Oh, his humour. Whatever you say, he's been a wonderful performer. So I think anyone just on a human level will miss that. And I think actually he has put one really critical leadership position for the country in the international framework. You know, his leadership of Britain at the time of COP, his utter commitment to net zero. He was right. He was on the right side of history. And that's another thing that I've been determined to hear that Liz Truss is equally committed to, because it's very, very important that we don't flinch in our commitment to net zero, whatever the short-term challenges.
You've got a new HS2 station coming to the West Midlands, expected to create 1,000 jobs, 22 new apprenticeships. How important is it that those jobs, that the people involved in the construction of the new HS2 station are from the West Midlands, that those jobs go to local people?
There's a good news story today. HS2 announced that Lango Rourke would be building the interchange station in Solihull, which isn't just a station, it's sort of the centre of an economic development there. 3,000 homes, take the pressure off the green belt elsewhere in Solihull Borough. So really good news story today. 1,000 jobs, critical, and we will be making sure that they are given to local people. Indeed, we'll be working with the contractors, as we already are, with Balfour Beatty, for example, to train local people, unemployed people, specifically for jobs in HS2. So we've got a great record on that, and I'm sure we'll do the same with Lango Rourke.
And final question to you. Many of us, I certainly watched the Commonwealth Games. It was a great showcase for Birmingham. How do you ensure it has a lasting legacy for Birmingham?
Very kind of you. And we did have a report on Friday from the government just doing the first review of it. And it said that 8 out of 10 people in the UK have an enhanced impression of Birmingham and the West Midlands now. So that's incredible. And about half of the people in the UK actually watched some element of the game. So a brilliant success, but you're quite right. All about legacy now. So we've got sports facilities, we've got new transport infrastructure, we've got people trained in jobs for the future, we've got twice as many business inquiries for inward investment than before. So basically the mission now is to build on all of that, land those business inquiries, make sure the people who've got trained have got sustainable jobs, and of course bid for other big events, because we've shown the world that Birmingham and the West Midlands can host anything. So we're very confident we'll win many more events in the future.
Let's hear it for Brum, Britain's second city. Now, let's just bring you up to speed here on GB Newsday, because it is official now. Liz Truss is our new Prime Minister, after being invited by the Queen at Balmoral earlier to form a new administration. And that was shortly after Boris Johnson tendered his resignation. Liz Truss's jet now on the way back to RAF Northolt.
And one of the first things that Liz Truss needs to do as Prime Minister is to appoint her cabinet. One of the people who won't be in the cabinet is Michael Gove, who called Liz Truss's policy ideas a holiday from reality.
Well, we're joined now by Michael Gove's former special advisor, Charlie Rowley. And Charlie, of course, reality will bite her pretty quickly when she gets that in tray in number 10.
I think that's absolutely right. And What we've seen today are announcements that have been briefed out to deal with the difficult decisions when it comes to the cost of living and the energy crisis. That is the number one concern that people have up and down the country. I think the comments that Michael made, my former employee, as you rightly say, earlier on in this contest, reflected the nature of how the contest was being shaped. So you had Liz Truss early on appealing to Conservative Party voters and activists by appearing to be the tax-cutting Conservative, by being the Conservative that wasn't going to introduce any new taxes, that was ruling out an extension of the windfall tax. That is one way to campaign to the constituency of the Conservative Party. But I think reality has hit home that the challenge requires a greater depth of intervention, and that's what we're hearing may be announced in the next couple of days.
Good to see you. So you were special advisor to Michael Gove when he was in the cabinet. I want you to take us behind the scenes of a cabinet reshuffle day. You will have been witness to it, you will have watched it all happen, you will have prepared yourself, but also watched the politician you work with. I don't know, do they sit by the phone? What are they doing? Are there jobs that they particularly have their eye on? Are there jobs that they turn down? Take us into the scene that will be going on and all the anxious politicians we have today.
There'll be huge anxiety across Whitehall, Westminster today. Everybody, I'm sure, will be waiting by the phone in the hope that they get the call from number 10 switchboard to say the Prime Minister wants to see you now. But I think there will be people who clearly today have taken the decision that they won't serve. So Nadine Dorries has obviously resigned. Priti Patel also stepping back as Home Secretary. It is perhaps not going to be as exciting as previous reshuffles because we've had a lot of briefing of those key positions that will already be filled. It would be a huge shock to Westminster if those candidates that have been touted for those positions are not the ones that take them up. But there are still plenty of junior ministerial roles to be had. If you're an advisor, as I formerly was, it is totally out of your hands, it's totally out of your control. You are at the behest of number 10 and they will be making those appointments later today.
But how key is it now for her to really gather people around her? Because clearly you reward loyalty, but there are so many MPs who didn't support her before the vote went to the party membership. She could be in danger if she doesn't go for an inclusive one party.
I think that's right. I mean, I think what we've heard today, particularly in the comments about and the potential policies that are coming forward to deal with the energy crisis, I think it just demonstrates what a shrewd political operator that Liz can be. Because all the while appealing to the party base, as I said earlier, about being the tax-cutting Conservative, there might have been some anxiety amongst members and MP colleagues that might not have backed her in the first instance, that might have preferred an approach similar to what Rishi was offering. So I think if you get the policies right, and it seems to me that the energy briefing that has gone out earlier on today seems to be the right approach. That is another way of just binding colleagues behind you, and I think that we might just see more to Liz than what we thought as a shrewd political operator.
Charlie, spare a thought for all the staffers and advisors today. Give them some advice if they're watching. If your boss gets fired or who has decided to walk away, you lose your job. There are many of you out there. How do you cope with it? How do you get to the other side?
Well, I took myself to a rather well-known Westminster watering hole and might have had a white wine shandy, a white wine spritzer. I think it's a really bizarre day because you're in the office day in, day out. You're at the cut and thrust of politics. You absorb so much on behalf of the minister that you work for or the cabinet minister. There is so much that goes on behind the scenes, trying to get policies in the right place, trying to promote stories in the media, trying to protect your minister from stories that might be in the media. So you're subject to a huge amounts of pressure. And then, of course, when the day finally comes that you are no longer required and surplus to requirements, all of that that goes away. The phone stops ringing. A job that's been all-consuming 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no longer exists, and you've got to try and find a way to rediscover your friends and family that you've probably lost along the way and haven't reached out to for some time, and just go back to having what is more of a normal and stable life.
That's a really nice insight that you provided for us there. Charlie Rowley, former advisor, special advisor to Michael Gove. Thank you so much.
And of course, they're all always welcome to join us here on GB Newsday with their thoughts and reflections on what's going on. And plenty to discuss for Liz Truss, of course, as she's now the new Prime Minister. Greeted already with praise from Ukraine, of course, Foreign Secretary as she was, but with, yes, concerns from Russia.
The Kremlin made comments that relations with the UK might deteriorate in response to Truss winning the Tory leadership race. Our Home and Security editor, Mark White, is here with us to tell us more.
Badge of honour, isn't it, to be criticised by Russia at the moment, I would have thought?
Well, I think so, yes. They have a particular history, of course. Putin, the Kremlin in general, Sergei Lavrov.
Didn't get on with Lavrov, did she?
Did not at all get on well. Yeah. So I think she'll be quite happy that Russia are sort of belly aching about her being now given the prime ministerial post in this country. She's going to take a tough line, I think. She's telling us that she is full square behind Ukraine in its efforts to repel Russia from its territory, much as Boris Johnson was, of course. We remember Boris Johnson making 3 trips to Ukraine, one of the first leaders in
I mean, do you think that link will carry on, that there'll be any sort of opportunity for him to have like an envoy role, an unofficial envoy?
I wouldn't be surprised if Liz Truss, in the early weeks of her premiership, wants to try to get across to reassure the Ukrainians that Britain still remains full square behind them in their efforts, as I say, to repel Russia.
And she starts being Prime Minister. She was Foreign Secretary. How beneficial is it to have served as Foreign Secretary? You will have some connections. You will have made some enemies. Just give us a quick lowdown of the benefits of having served.
Yeah, I think it's very beneficial, of course. She is immersed in the subject matter. She knows all about it. She's spoken to many of the key players over recent months involved in this particular conflict. She has been liaising very closely with the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace. Now, interestingly, it's being suggested that he will stay in his post. Only time will tell when she starts to make those first of those cabinet announcements this evening. But that would make sense. Ben Wallace has been praised, really, for the job that he has done in defence at a very difficult time. He is respected by those within the services as a former serving officer in the Guards himself. So, you know, this is a man who I think will be staying in place, has a good working relationship, we think, with Liz Truss as well.
And the armed forces like him as well, of course. That's the other aspect. You know, he's well regarded. Is the jury still out as far as the French are concerned on our new Prime Minister, bearing in mind what she said about Monsieur Macron?
I'm sure that with Realpolitik it will all be fine.
But clear, I mean, it's a difficult problem, bearing in mind what we're discussing earlier about what's happening across the Channel.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the... Obviously, cost of living is the massive issue. The Ukrainian war is also a huge issue. But there is no doubt many people are very concerned about the situation in the Channel. It will be key to whoever the Home Secretary is to try to get to grips with that in conjunction with Liz Truss as well. And, of course, winning the cooperation of the French. It's a tough ask. Tough ask, but
Mark White.
I'm sure she'll try.
Mark White, thank you. And Catherine Foster, our political reporter, who has been with us with her excellent analysis throughout the day. Thank you too. You have been watching GB Newsday on the day the Queen has appointed Liz Truss as her new Prime Minister.
Yes, she's on that jet back to RAF Northolt. Continuing coverage here, of course, on GB News as she lands. And we're expecting then, perhaps at 4 o'clock, maybe a bit later, that speech in Downing Street. Next up, Patrick with GB News Live, bringing you the new Prime Minister's speech from the steps of Downing Street and the build-up to. Before that, let's get an update on the latest weather.
Alex Deacon here with your latest weather update from the Met Office. It's more showers for the rest of today and indeed for the rest of this week. Heavy downpours in places, a few thunderstorms thrown in for good measure. And here's the reason why. This big area of low pressure just spiralling out to the west of Ireland, throwing bands of heavy showers across the country. It's not going to rain all through the afternoon and evening. They are in bands, these showers. So some places having a good few hours of dry and bright weather. Not too many showers till this evening across parts of East Anglia. And then a good chunk of England will be dry for much of the night before the next band of heavy showers spirals northwards again. thunderstorms possible, hail thrown in for good measure as well, and a lot of rain falling in a